Forgotten God representative. The reason the Forgotten Emperor had dared to be so arrogant in twisting right into wrong to attack Ling Tian City was because he thought that Ling Tian City was a mere player city. Players were far weaker than the Forgotten Continent's residents, so in their eyes, they could do as they wished with players and players' cities. After harming their interests, they could casually find an excuse to suppress or destroy the player's city. The Forgotten Emperor never thought that angering a player's city would result in this sort of revenge, and neither did White Eagle and Black Demon by his side. When the undead army rose up and flames burned the city, they finally realized just how terrifying of a person they had offended due to their greed and envy. Now that Ling Chen had suddenly appeared in front of them, a look of fear appeared on both White Eagle and Black Demon's faces. However, seeing Ling Chen, the Forgotten Emperor did not seem fearful at all, but he instead looked extraordinarily calm. He looked at Ling Chen directly, and his pale face started to regain its color.
Ling Tian, it's great that you've come. Looks like I don't have to think of ways to find you.
The Forgotten Emperor's reaction caused White Eagle and Black Demon to feel dumbfounded. When the undead army started to attack the city, both of them had told the Forgotten Emperor as soon as possible. With their power, they could naturally tell that the Forgotten City could not stop these 1 million Lord Grade undead. In order to protect the Forgotten City, they had suggested that the Forgotten Emperor immediately go and find Ling Tian. Even if they had to lower their heads and sign an agreement, they had to immediately move the undead army away, otherwise it was possible that the city would be destroyed. However, the Forgotten Emperor had determinedly refused. After the battle at Ling Tian City, he now felt immense fear and hatred towards Ling Tian. What's more, he was the emperor of a royal city. How could he lower his head to a player that even a resident of the Forgotten Continent would look down upon? Even when the undead army spread throughout the entire city and flames started to ravage the city, the Forgotten Emperor stayed within his palace without any signs of doing anything, much less come to an agreement with Ling Tian. After the palace started to burn, when White Eagle and Black Demon saved him, they became prepared for the possibility that the Forgotten City really might be destroyed. However, they never thought that the Forgotten Emperor, who was so determined not to meet with Ling Tian, would suddenly react like this. The Forgotten Emperor's reaction also slightly surprised Ling Chen. Just as the Forgotten Emperor stopped speaking, a massive force descended from above, locking onto Ling Chen's body, making his body feel 10 times heavier. This pressure almost caused Snow Cherry to fall from the sky, and Ling Chen felt as if there was something nailed to his chest, making it difficult for him to breathe. Ling Chen felt quite shocked. The strength of this aura was not at all weaker than that of the undead war god. Ling Chen quickly sucked in a breath, trying to suppress this pressure, and looked up. Above, and to the left, a white figure had appeared there without him noticing. The person was wearing a moon-white dress, and a white fog floated around her, making it impossible to see her figure or appearance. When Ling Chen looked at her, he felt an indescribable ethereal feeling, causing his gaze to flicker. It was an incredibly mystical feeling, and when looking at her it made one feel like she was standing atop clouds, looking down on all beings, so high that she could not be touched. Ling Chen deeply frowned. This power, aura, and moon-white dress, could she be? When White Eagle and Black Demon saw the figure, they both stared before revealing expressions of delirious joy. The Forgotten Emperor started to wail.
Lady Moon God representative, you've finally come. Please save the Forgotten City. Please save the Forgotten City.
The Forgotten Emperor then pointed at Ling Chen.
It's him. It's this mad player who brought disaster to the Forgotten City. The punishment he should receive should be the most severe punishment in the world. He should be imprisoned within the lunar sky hell.
Lady Moon God representative? Ling Chen's face fell, but there was no fear or panic on his face. He instead coldly laughed. The Forgotten God representative really came?
We pay our respects to Lady Moon God Representative. Please save the Forgotten City.
White Eagle and Black Demon also hurriedly bowed, while earnestly shouting. The scene of the Forgotten City being inundated with undead, while being razed, was painful to look at. The Forgotten God Representative glanced at the city below, and her frown was soon filled with shock.
Phoenix God Heavenly Flames!
The Phoenix clan was unique to the Forgotten Continent, and as the Forgotten Continent's Moon God Representative, how could the Forgotten God Representative not recognize the Phoenix God Heavenly Flames? However, the shock only lasted for a moment before disappearing, and she looked at Ling Chen as her voice filled with pressure entered his ears.
Otherworlder Ling Chen, why have you committed such a crime? Why? You're asking me?
Ling Chen did not hesitate to meet the Forgotten God Representative's gaze. After adjusting, the pressure from the Forgotten God Representative was not as bad anymore. Ling Chen pointed at the Forgotten Emperor.
Why don't you ask him why? Everything I did today was because they forced me. Everything I did today was retribution for their actions. Forgotten God Representative, I instead want to ask you something.
Ling Chen's voice became low as a savage aura erupted from him.
When Ling Chen City was being attacked by them, as the Moon God Representative who protects peace and order in the Forgotten Continent, where were you? Why didn't you appear like this to stop them? I only just found out about that.
The Forgotten God Representative calmly replied.
It was indeed the Forgotten City that was in the wrong, but that doesn't give you an excuse to commit such a great atrocity. Moreover, in that battle, Ling Chen City only lost 19 fairies, and the damage to the city was limited, while the Forgotten City lost 100,000 soldiers. In terms of loss, the Forgotten City's loss was much greater than Ling Chen City's. Shaw!
Ling Chen was furious and roared back.
What sort of bullshit logic is that? Ling Chen City didn't offend anyone. It was just that this old forgotten dog was envious of Ling Chen City's development, and he wanted to destroy Ling Chen City. No matter how many of their people died, it's all on their heads. However, all of Ling Chen City's fairies died as innocent people. Let alone those 19 fairies, if even one of them died, using the entire Forgotten City as atonement is just.
Ling Chen's words were incredibly extreme. It was as if the safety of his people was more important than anything else, and even if the other side lost 100,000 people, it had nothing to do with him. The Forgotten God Representative frowned, and the Forgotten Emperor loudly shouted,
Lady Moon God Representative, don't waste words with him. He's just a madman, a demon. There's no way to forgive his crimes. Attacking Ling Chen City was indeed our fault, and I will receive punishment for that. But, please, Lady Moon God Representative, get rid of this evil demon and save the Forgotten City.
Ling Chen's words undoubtedly also infuriated the Forgotten God Representative. She looked at Ling Chen, her voice icy cold.
Even if you have all the reasons in the world, that doesn't justify this great crime. Immediately stop. Get rid of these undead and extinguish the fire, and you'll have a chance to repent. Otherwise what?
Ling Chen cut her off without a trace of fear on his face. Only a cold smile.
You want to save the Forgotten City? Do it then. You're a high and mighty Moon God Representative, the protector of the Forgotten City, while I'm just a tiny player who you don't even put in your eyes. Don't tell me that a majestic Moon God Representative can't resolve a problem caused by a tiny player like me. Do you need me to resolve it? You?
The Forgotten God Representative became even more furious. If she could resolve the disaster, she would have done it already. However, with more than 1 million Lord-grade undead, and the fact that they had spread to every corner of the city, even she could not kill them all before the Forgotten City was destroyed. Furthermore, the fire burning the Forgotten City was Phoenix God Heavenly Flames, and even her Moon God power was unable to easily extinguish it. Only the Moon God clan's 3 moon goddesses could do such a thing.
Ling Chen.
This time, the calm Forgotten God representative was completely enraged. She believed what the Forgotten Emperor had said about this player, who had caused this disaster, being a madman and a demon. She realized that talking to him was simply wasting time. Facing such a person, all she had to do was bring judgment instead of merely wasting words. A white light flashed, and a moon god staff appeared in front of the Forgotten God representative's body. Moon god power began to surge within her rage.
You brought disaster to the Forgotten City, destroyed countless residents' homes, and caused the deaths of countless innocents. You showed no remorse or willingness to atone for your crimes. Even the worst punishments in the world are not sufficient.
Although you're a player and can't truly die in this world, the Moon God clan has cruel punishments for evildoers like you. Your crimes will never appear in the Mystic Moon world again. I will seal you in the Lunar Sky Hell, and you will never step into the Forgotten Continent again.
When the Forgotten Emperor heard the Forgotten God representative's words, a look of glee appeared on his face, and his gaze towards Ling Chen became one full of pity and mockery. The Lunar Sky Hell was a forbidden area where the worst criminals were held, and it was said to be the most terrifying place in the continent. Once one entered, one would never see the light of day again. There were all sorts of demons, evil spirits, and evildoers there, and entering was like going into a terrifying hell. Those who entered would spend every day in darkness and fear until the day they died.
Oh, is that so?
Ling Chen did not reveal any fear that the Forgotten Emperor had hoped to see. Ling Chen's eyes narrowed as he looked at the Forgotten God representative, and a circle of crimson fire appeared around his body. The layer of fire was very thin, but it gave off an astonishing temperature to the point that the heat waves made it so that White Eagle and Black Demon could not breathe, making them retreat with the Forgotten Emperor. The Forgotten God representative frowned, and he said in deep shock,
"So it really was the Phoenix God Heavenly Flames. Where did you get the fallen Phoenix royal clan's fire?"
Ling Chen completely ignored her question and slowly spread out his arms as he coldly laughed.
"You want to seal me into the Lunar Sky Hell, right? I want to see if you'll seal me first, or if my Phoenix God Heavenly Flames will turn this forgotten city into dust. Give it a go."
The Forgotten God representative's aura violently trembled, and the Forgotten Emperor's face fell. At that moment, a furious voice boomed out.
"Which bastard wants to send my son-in-law to the Lunar Sky Hell?"
The voice was like a peal of thunder, causing the minds of everyone who heard it to feel dizzy, and they almost fell from the sky. The voice caused everyone's ears to buzz, and at that moment, the space twisted as a dense black light appeared, which contained a powerfully built body. The figure was tall, had muscular limbs, and wore a black robe. The person's skin was ashen gray, and he had a savage-looking face akin to that of a beast's. His rage-filled eyes were completely black without any white to be seen. What was the most eye-catching was the black crescent moon mark on his forehead, which gave off a dark light. This person's appearance caused the Forgotten God representative to deeply frown and look quite confused. However, when she saw the black crescent moon on his forehead, her face fell, and she cried out,
"Underworld
King!"
Underworld God Canon. When the Underworld King appeared, his aura felt as if it could cover the sky and hide the sun, completely suppressing the Forgotten God representative's aura, as if it was not there. The Forgotten Emperor, White Eagle, and Black Demon were almost knocked out of the sky by the amount of power he radiated. In their shock, when they heard the Forgotten God representative cry out Underworld King, their jaws almost hit the ground. Underworld King? This person was the Underworld King? What sort of character was the Underworld King? He was one of the peak existences in the Mystic Moon world, and no matter if it were his power or status, he stood on the same level as the Moon God clan's 3 moon goddesses. In fact, even the peerless moon goddesses were slightly inferior to him. In front of him, The Emperor of the Forgotten Continent's human world was worth less than a fart. To a human like the Forgotten Emperor, being able to see a moon god representative with his own eyes was the greatest blessing on his life, and seeing an existence on the level of the three moon goddesses, like the Underworld King, was something that he didn't even dare to think about. However, since the words Underworld King had come from the Forgotten God representative's mouth, how could she be wrong? Furthermore, the Underworld King's aura felt as if it could shake the heavens and the earth, and it was many times more powerful than the Forgotten God representatives. The Forgotten Emperor stared at the legendary Underworld King with respect and fear, and he did not dare to even breathe loudly, much less speak. He couldn't understand why the super-legendary figure had come to the tiny Forgotten City, and he seemed to be furious. Also, what did he mean by son-in-law? Ling Chen's mouth widened, staring at the Underworld King's giant frame. Holy crap, why did his father-in-law come all the way here? Something big was going to happen.
That's right, your elder's the Underworld King.
Hearing the Forgotten God representative call out his name, the Underworld King glared at her as he said,
From how this little girl is dressed, she is from that moon god clan, right?
There were very few people in the mystic moon world who would dare to call a moon god representative little girl and casually speak about that moon god clan. In front of him, the moon god representative had no choice but to retract her aura and speak levelly.
Lord Underworld King's fame precedes him. It is my honor to see you today. I wonder why Underworld King has come here. What the hell do you think? This Underworld King's son-in-law is going to bullied, so how could I not come?
The Underworld King said furiously. His eyes suddenly widened as he roared at the Forgotten God representative.
Since you're from the Moon God clan, the person who was saying that they wanted to seal this Underworld King's son-in-law into the lunar sky hell was you? Your son-in-law?
The Forgotten God representative stared in surprise for a moment before looking over at Ling Chen's body, and her eyebrows jumped. Could the son-in-law he be referring to? No. Absolutely not. How could a player from another world be the Underworld King's son-in-law? Moreover, this player hadn't even been in the Mystic Moon for a year. How was this possible? The Underworld King turned and patted Ling Chen's shoulder as he raised his chest and said loudly,
Son-in-law, was it this girlie who said she wanted to throw you into the lunar sky hell? Don't be scared to speak. I'll give you the justice you deserve. God damn it, this Underworld King has stayed peaceful for just a few thousand years, and a tiny little moon god representative wants to bully this elder son-in-law? Preposterous? Even if the moon god clan's 3 women came, this elder is going to get justice for you.
When the Underworld King addressed Ling Chen as son-in-law, the Forgotten Emperor's body trembled and his face instantly went pale. If it wasn't for White Eagle and Black Demon supporting him, he would have fallen to the ground. Now, the Forgotten Emperor almost felt like crying. What the hell, Ling Tian? If you had such a powerful backer like the Underworld King, why didn't you get him to come out earlier? If I knew that you were the Underworld King's son-in-law, even if someone begged me to offend Ling Tian City, I wouldn't have done it. Just what the hell's going on? The Forgotten Emperor's intestines were green with regret, and looking down at how pitiful the Forgotten City looked, he wanted to cry and wail. Before, when the Moon God representative had appeared, he had been incredibly pleased, and he had thought not only would the city be saved, but also Ling Tian would receive an extremely heavy punishment. Who would have thought that although he had the Forgotten God representative as a powerful backer, Ling Tian had the Underworld King. In front of the Underworld King, the powerful Moon God representative was simply dust. Even the Moon God clan wouldn't offend the Underworld over the Forgotten City. If there was a pill that could turn back time, even if he had to sell all of his assets, the Forgotten Emperor would buy one.
He's a player from another world. How can he be your son-in-law? Could it be that you've got the wrong person?
The Forgotten God representative asked in shock. She simply couldn't accept that a player was the Underworld King's son-in-law. Moreover, it seemed like the Underworld King greatly favored this son-in-law of his, and he had come out for him. From her memories, the Underworld King had not come to the Forgotten Continent in many millennia.
Wrong person? Bullshit! Do you think your elder is an idiot? Do you really think I would be mistaken about my son-in-law?
The Underworld King roared. His loud voice, mixed with his aura, threatened to collapse the space around him. The Forgotten God representative kept herself calm and spoke as steadily as she could.
I don't dare to doubt the Underworld King's words. However, you should know that your son-in-law brought 1 million undead into the Forgotten City and used Phoenix God Heavenly Flames to burn the entire city, bringing a massive disaster to the Forgotten City. You want to send this Underworld King's son-in-law to the lunar sky hell over this little city? What gall!
His booming and coarse voice cut off the Forgotten God representative. The Underworld King looked absolutely furious, and he waved his right hand. A black light flashed, and a jet-black item that was as tall as his body appeared in front of him. It was a large cannon without a stand, and the Underworld King held the ordinary-looking cannon under his arms, pointing it towards the Forgotten City.
Do you believe that your elder won't blast this goddamn city to kingdom come right here and now? I dare you to seal me into the lunar sky hell.
When this jet-black cannon appeared, the Forgotten Emperor, White Eagle, and Black Demon did not feel much, but the Forgotten God representative's expression suddenly changed. Shock suddenly appeared on her calm face, and even her voice started to tremble.
You Underworld God Cannon!
Hearing the words Underworld God Cannon, the Forgotten Emperor, White Eagle, and Black Demon's hearts trembled, and their bodies weakened, almost pissing themselves on the spot. Very few humans in the Forgotten Continent knew of the name Underworld God Cannon, but as the Emperor and peak-level experts of the Forgotten Continent, the Forgotten Emperor, White Eagle, and Black Demon clearly knew what it was. It was a forbidden weapon that was called the God-Killing Cannon, and it was publicly recognized to be the weapon with the most powerful destructive abilities. A single blast from the cannon was enough to destroy the heavens and annihilate the earth, and it could turn a mountain into flatlands. Even true gods would fear such a cannon. If this cannon blasted the Forgotten City, the entire Forgotten City would disappear with not even a speck of dust left. The Underworld was much weaker than the Moon God Clan, but the Moon God Clan had never dared to offend the Underworld precisely because of this terrifying Underworld God Cannon. If the Underworld was truly angered and blasted the Underworld God Cannon towards where the Moon God Clan was, the entire Moon God Clan would suffer a calamity. Now, not only had the Underworld King taken out the ultimate weapon that could strike fear into true gods, but he had also pointed it towards the Forgotten City. Let alone the Forgotten Emperor, even the Forgotten God representative's face went pale, and she subconsciously retreated. She could barely maintain her composure before the Underworld King, but she couldn't help but fear the Underworld God Cannon in his hands. She had long since heard that the Underworld King was extremely short-tempered, but she didn't know that it was to this degree. Not only had he appeared for this son-in-law of his, he had even taken out the Underworld God Cannon. A madman. An absolute madman. Both of these people were madmen.
Please calm down, Underworld King. We did not want to offend your family, nor did we want to make you angry.
Facing the Underworld God Cannon, the Forgotten God representative couldn't help but back down, and she spoke in a pleading tone.
Please put away the Underworld God Cannon this matter. I'll naturally give you a satisfactory outcome. That's right, that's right. Father-in-law, you're too emotional. We're all cultured people here, and we should talk things out. Using violence and brute strength can't solve problems.
Ling Chen spoke out at an opportune moment, and he said those words with a face full of compassion. At the same time, his eyes were fixed on the Underworld God Cannon. This was the legendary Underworld God Cannon. Its appearance simply didn't do its reputation justice. This incredibly lackluster and plain exterior was something that even Ling Chen could create. You're a man of culture? You talk things out? Using violence and brute strength can't solve problems? Not just the Forgotten Emperor, but even the Forgotten God representative felt like throwing dog crap onto Ling Chen's face. Who was it that just summoned 1 million undead to cause chaos within the Forgotten City? Who had just burned the Forgotten City down with Phoenix God heavenly flames? How had said that they wanted the entire Forgotten City to be destroyed as atonement for the fallen fairies. How thick did his face have to be to say such words? In actuality, Ling Chen had never planned to actually destroy the Forgotten City. Otherwise, he wouldn't have only sent 1.2 million players from Ling Tian City, and he wouldn't have used the Phoenix God Heavenly Flame so sparingly. If he wanted to destroy the entire city, all he had to do was ask Xiling to use Dazzling Red Lotus, World-Burning Heavenly Flames, and Heavenly Wrath of the Nine Suns, and he would have been able to accomplish that easily. However, in the end, there were simply too many innocent people within the Forgotten City, and he didn't want himself and Xiling to commit such a grave crime. If it was just himself, he wouldn't have minded if he just destroyed the Forgotten City. However, there was also Ling Tian City, and Ling Tian City's countless players and NPCs. If he really destroyed the Forgotten City, the Moon God clan would be enraged, and they might retaliate against Ling Tian City. Now that the Underworld King had appeared, Ling Tian couldn't allow himself to destroy the Forgotten City either. That would create great enmity between the Moon God clan and the Underworld, and it might even result in a large war. Angering the Moon God clan simply wasn't a wise decision. However, not only had the Underworld King appeared, he had even taken out the Underworld God cannon to scare the Moon God representative. As the Underworld King, he naturally knew what the potential consequences could be. However, since he had done this, Ling Chen felt incredibly touched, moving him to call the Underworld King father-in-law willingly. After all, it didn't cost him anything to address the Underworld King as such. The words father-in-law made the Underworld King feel as if a flower had blossomed within his heart, and his rage was greatly quelled. He straightened his back and coarsely roared,
"Then, son-in-law, what do you say we should do? We can't just let them bully you for nothing."
"You're being bullied?" This time, the Forgotten Emperor really was about to burst into tears. Just who was bullying who? The Forgotten City was in ruins, yet your son-in-law was perfectly unharmed. 3 conditions. Ling Chen walked forwards and said to the Forgotten Emperor with a dark expression,
"Because of your own selfish desires, you accused Ling Tian City of crimes and led an army to attack Ling Tian City. You caused great damage to Ling Tian City and killed 19 innocent fairies. Do you admit your guilt?" Just as Ling Chen stopped talking, the Underworld King's ferocious eyes glared at the Forgotten Emperor. His gaze caused the human with the highest authority in the Forgotten Continent to tremble, and he almost fell down. The Forgotten Emperor rapidly nodded and said, I do.
Under the Underworld King's gaze, even if those things weren't true, he'd still admit them. Otherwise, the Underworld King might really just fire the cannon. With the Underworld King's power, toying with the Forgotten Emperor would be like toying with an ant.
Repaying one's debts is a natural law of the heavens. Since you attacked Ling Tian City out of your own selfish desires and killed Ling Tian City's people, as the Vice Lord of Ling Tian City, was I in the right for taking revenge on the Forgotten City?
Ling Chen calmly asked with a piercing gaze.
You were,
the Forgotten Emperor bitterly replied. Even if his courage was as big as the heavens, he wouldn't dare to shake his head. Ling Chen coldly smiled.
Then is the current state of the Forgotten City something that you deserve? Yes, and no matter if it were Ling Tian City or the Forgotten City's losses and disasters, the root of it was you, the Forgotten Emperor, right?
The Forgotten Emperor's face became incredibly pale, and he raised his head and shakily looked at the Forgotten God representative and then the Underworld King. He lowered his head and spoke with a trembling voice.
Yes, since you've admitted it, then the resolution will be very simple,
Ling Chen said as he lightly smirked.
Before, your attack on Ling Tian City that caused 19 fairies to die should have resulted in your entire city dying with them. However, since the Forgotten God representative has come out, how could I, a tiny player, not give her face?
Ling Chen's attitude had been extreme from the beginning, and the Underworld King was incredibly domineering and aggressive. However, now, Ling Chen was spinning this whole thing as giving the Forgotten God representative face, causing her expression to darken. Ling Chen looked at the Forgotten Emperor as he said,
If you want me to get rid of the 1 million undead and Phoenix God heavenly flames, it's possible, but you need to agree to 3 conditions. Otherwise, the undead and the fire will remain until the Forgotten City is destroyed. What are they?
By now, the Forgotten Emperor was no longer able to rely on the Forgotten God representative. Facing the Underworld King, the Forgotten God representative did not have the right to even attack the Underworld King, let alone bargain with him. Only the 3 moon goddesses could do such a thing. As such, he could only act obediently.
First of all, I want you to publicly apologize to Ling Tian City in front of the entire Forgotten Continent, and go to Ling Tian City to pay your respects to the 19 fallen fairies.
Thinking back to the sorrow and hurt that the families of the 19 fairies had experienced, Ling Chen gnashed his teeth.
Publicly? Impossible. I'm the Emperor of the Forgotten Continent. Asking me to publicly apologize to a player's city, how will I maintain my dignity? This is something that the entire Forgotten Continent will not be able to accept.
Hearing Ling Chen's first condition, the Forgotten Emperor shouted out. Power was of utmost importance in the Forgotten Continent, and players were much weaker than the Forgotten City's residents. As such, asking the high and mighty Forgotten Emperor to apologize to a player's city publicly was something that he simply could not accept. If he really did this, he would lose all face as the Emperor. It would be admitting to the whole world his wrongs, and his reputation would be greatly tarnished among both residents of the Forgotten Continent and players.
Scum! My son-in-law is giving you an opportunity to repent, yet you're refusing to agree. You think that your elder won't blow up your little city? Dignity? Shaw, let's see where your dignity is going to be after I've blown up your city.
Before Ling Chen could reply, the Underworld King had already started to roar. When the Underworld God cannon slightly shook, the Forgotten Emperor, White Eagle, and Black Demon all fell to their knees. The Forgotten God representative frowned. Apologizing after committing a wrong wasn't anything big, and it was something that should be done anyways. However, the Forgotten Emperor was the Emperor of the Forgotten Continent's humans, and making a public apology was not the same thing. However, facing the Underworld King's threats, the Forgotten God representative had no other choice but to ask,
Ling Tian, what are your other 2 conditions?
The Forgotten God representative's words evidently signified that if the other conditions were not too excessive, the first one would also be agreed to. Her decision naturally represented the Forgotten Emperor. Ling Chen did not waste any words and directly said,
The second condition is to compensate Ling Tian City for 3 times our losses. The cost of repairing the city, the physical resources lost, labor required, time lost, relocation of residents, resettling fees, transportation fees, the economic loss from closing for 2 days, the damage to the business street, the damage to the class change system, the damage to the quest system, the damage to the residential system, the damage to the entertainment system, the damage to our expansion plans, and the loss of levels and equipment for defending, as well as the mental harm caused to the players and residents, especially the fairies. Ling Chen City will give you a total figure within 5 days. Those who owe money must repay money, and you are to repay 3 times that amount, not a single copper less.
The Forgotten Emperor's face became paler and paler, and he started to feel dizzy. He knew roughly how much Ling Chen City made every day, otherwise he wouldn't have gone to attack it out of envy. The amount of money lost from closing for a single day was an astronomical number, and that wasn't even including the money for all of the damage, and it was 3 times that. After the final number was calculated, even the royal city, which had existed for many millennia, would take a great hit. The Forgotten God representative's chest heaved as she gritted her teeth and said,
"What's the third condition?" "The third condition is much simpler."
Ling Chen turned his gaze to the Forgotten God representative, his gaze quite piercing.
"I don't want to see this sort of thing happen again, and I'm sure that you don't want to see the Forgotten City disappear from this world. I want the Forgotten Emperor and you, the Forgotten God representative, to take a blood oath that you will never act against Ling Chen City."
The third condition was the simplest but most important condition. His revenge this time was enough to scare the wits out of the Forgotten Emperor, so that he would never dare to make trouble for Ling Chen City again. However, there was still the Forgotten God representative. With the Underworld King present, the Forgotten God representative could only keep calm, but it was possible that she would come for revenge in future. The Underworld King belonged in the Underworld, and he couldn't always protect Ling Chen City. Moreover, Ling Chen was determined not to see the fairies in pain again, so relying on the Underworld King and the Underworld God Canon, he wanted both the Forgotten Emperor and Forgotten God representative to make an unbreakable oath so that Ling Chen City could truly stand permanently in the Forgotten Continent.
"This is impossible."
The Forgotten God representative refused, frowning as she said,
"As the Forgotten Continent's Moon God representative, I have the right and responsibility to protect the order in the Forgotten Continent and judge all evil. If I make such a promise, Ling Chen City will be outside my jurisdiction. If one day Ling Chen City decides to bring chaos upon the Forgotten Continent, will I have to just ignore it?" "Ha ha, you're thinking too much."
Ling Chen coldly laughed as he looked at the Forgotten God representative.
"Ling Chen City's people only want to live happily, and we will never act like certain people and attack others for no reason. What you're worried about will never happen. Of course, being forced into action is a different matter. Nevertheless, I'll add a caveat to this. Unless Ling Chen City commits an unforgivable crime towards you, you are never to touch Ling Chen City."
This time, the Forgotten God representative did not refuse. Looking at the Underworld King beside Ling Chen, she simply could not find a reason to refuse. This was because of the Underworld King. Even if the Underworld committed some grave sin, let alone Ling Chen City, she would not necessarily go and bring judgment. The Forgotten God representative frowned as she replied,
"As long as Ling Chen City does no evil, there's no reason for me to act against them. A blood oath makes no difference to me."
Following this, she said calmly,
"I, the Forgotten Continent's Moon God representative, hereby swear that unless the Ling Chen City commits an unforgivably grave sin, I will never act against Ling Chen City. If I break this oath, I will be executed by the heavens."
The Forgotten Emperor also made a similar oath.
"In that case, you agree to all 3 conditions?"
Ling Chen said after expressionlessly listening to their oaths.
"With the god-killing Underworld God Canon pointing towards the Forgotten City, do we have the right to refuse?"
The Forgotten God representative asked mockingly before looking towards the Forgotten City.
"I hereby agree to all 3 of your conditions on behalf of the Forgotten City. Please draw back your undead army and Phoenix God Heavenly Flames."
Ling Chen secretly breathed out in relief. The Underworld King's appearance had made everything go much more smoothly. Otherwise, even if they had gotten to the same conclusion, it would have taken much more effort and danger. After all, the fire god's bulwark and Shi Ling's flames could never compare to the Underworld King and his Underworld God canon. As such, the Forgotten God representative and Forgotten Emperor readily agreed to the three conditions. Under Ling Chen's command, Lanier silently appeared. The black crescent moon on her forehead flashed, and all of the undead in the city stood still before vanishing into black smoke. The Phoenix God heavenly flames were also extinguished by Shi Ling. With her Phoenix royal clan's bloodline, controlling the Phoenix God heavenly flames was incredibly easy.
Ayaya, this supporter's quite incredible.
The woman with red hair, who had been watching on this entire time, tapped her chin, a look of wonder on her face.
Son-in-law, father-in-law, what an interesting way of addressing each other. The Underworld King of the East is called Ming-Sa, and he is the only Saint Destroyer grade existence apart from the three moon goddesses. He is just as famed as Big Sis's adoptive father, the Sea Emperor. However, Lord Sea Emperor taking Big Sis to be his adoptive daughter is not surprising at all, while this legendary Underworld King called him his son-in-law. That's simply too incomprehensible. Could it be that the Underworld King married his daughter to a player? What's more, the Underworld King must be tens of thousands of years old, and his daughter must also be quite old. Who knows? She might be incredibly ugly and her body might be like a zombie's. Ah, so scary. How could he accept?
Yola said, as she furiously shook her head.
That's definitely not the case. That man avoids anything that isn't beautiful. Looks like I've got a headache now. Before, I thought that I could use my adoptive father to scare him, but I never thought that he would instead give me a surprise first. I feel terrible now,
the woman with red hair said sorrowfully.
Who would have thought that after so many years that the sex demon's tastes wouldn't have changed at all?
Yola said somewhat angrily.
But it looks like there's no reason for us to act anymore. It also looks like your confidence has been crushed. His experiences were not at all inferior to yours. That's right. So now I'm not feeling very well. You should know that if I can't suppress him this time, your beautiful Big Sis is going to becoming his little slave.
The woman with red hair said depressingly.
Then what are you preparing to do? Same thing as last time?
The woman with red hair swept back her hair that had been blown around by the wind behind her ear before raising her right hand, looking at the three glowing rings as she said,
Evidently, that's not possible because he has already found me. Have you not noticed that he has glanced towards where we are 4 times in the past minute?
Yola. The undead army was gone, and the Phoenix God heavenly flames had been extinguished, but the Forgotten City was still in complete disorder. Very few residents had been hurt, but the city guards had suffered heavy casualties. More than half of the palace had been razed, and nearly 1/3 of the whole city had been destroyed, permeating a burning smell throughout the city. The state of the Forgotten City was extremely miserable, but fortunately, the foundations of the city had not been destroyed. After everything had been settled, it was possible for the city to recover, but the compensation that was to be paid to Ling Tian City would definitely deal a great blow. However, this was the price that they had to pay for their actions, and they could not blame anyone for it. Logically speaking, no matter what excuse one had, destroying the human world's royal city to such an extent was an unforgivable crime, and locking that person up in the lunar sky hell for eternity would not be overdoing it at all. However, because of the Underworld King's protection, Ling Chen was completely fine, and he even had imposed 3 conditions on the Forgotten City. Right now, the Forgotten Emperor felt as if he had eaten 30 piles of hot dung.
Forgotten Emperor, I'm sure that you're clearer than anyone on how this ordeal started. What goes around comes around. What the Forgotten City has experienced cannot be blamed on anyone but you, resulting in countless innocents being harmed. I should punish you, but since the Forgotten City relies on you, I'll give you a chance to repent. If anything like this happens again, there will be no mercy.
After speaking severely to the Forgotten Emperor, the Forgotten God representative calmly looked at Ling Chen and left without saying any goodbyes. She had originally come to save the Forgotten City, but she had run into the Underworld King and his Underworld God Canon. In the end, she had been forced into lowering her head and accepting Ling Tian City's terms, filling her with rage, making her to not want to stay any longer than necessary. The Forgotten Emperor also left sullenly, with the help of his two mysterious god-grade bodyguards. He now regretted all of his actions to the bone, and even if he had 100 times the courage, he would not dare to take even half a step towards Ling Tian City.
I say, son-in-law, what the heck did you do? Just as I left the Underworld, I had to run into this crappy situation. Even the Moon God clan's people were called. If I hadn't come in time, you would have been eaten by that little girl from the Moon God clan.
The Underworld King put away the Underworld God Canon that had scared the Forgotten God representative so much as he spoke with his loud, coarse voice. Ling Chen helplessly grimaced.
The situation's just like what you heard. Ling Tian City was attacked for no reason by the Forgotten City, and I came here to teach them a lesson. Speaking of which, why are you here? Didn't you want to see our Underworld's Underworld God Canon? I came to give you the Underworld God Canon. I thought you were at Ling Tian City, but I had to follow you to this goddamn place,
the Underworld King said angrily. The Underworld King had indeed said that he would bring the Underworld God Canon to Ling Tian City, and he had come unexpectedly quickly. Ling Chen thought for a moment before saying,
Underworld King, you know Ling Tian City's whereabouts, so please take the Underworld God Canon there, and give it my dwarf friends there. I'll immediately let them know about you. I have some private matters that I need to attend to, so I can't go back right now. Private matters?
The Underworld King raised his eyebrows and lowered his voice.
Do you need my help?
Ling Chen shook his head.
No, I'll be able to settle it with a sentence.
The Underworld King did not say anything else and nodded.
All right, I'll take the Underworld God Canon to Ling Tian City right now, but I'll only stay for a day at most. If those dwarfs can't understand it within one day, they'll have to rely on themselves. Take care. Oh, and I'll leave my daughter's recovery of her body and soul to you. I'm desperate to hear her call me father again, so make sure you keep working on that. Do your best, do your best.
Just as the Underworld King finished speaking, he disappeared in a dark light, leaving behind a frowning Ling Chen. Ling Tian City's people definitely knew about what had happened at the Forgotten City. Ling Chen told Yunming Xian about the Underworld King delivering the Underworld God Canon, and he ended the call before she could even reply. He raised his right wrist and looked at the lunar scourge. At that moment, the lunar scourge was flickering with a weak and strange light. Ling Chen frowned and activated Broken Shadow, causing him and Snow Cherry to charge like a lightning bolt towards where the woman with red hair was. In his line of vision, a red figure grew larger and larger.
Aya, it's not like we'll run away. Why are you coming so quickly?
A voice filled with a slight teasing tone sounded in his ears, and the familiar sound caused Ling Chen's mind to tighten and his body to suddenly stop. At that moment, the red figure before him swayed, and an incredibly enchanting woman appeared before him. She was wearing a red dress, and her face slightly tilted back as she gently blinked with her upturned eyes. She lightly smiled at him with her luscious red lips, her star-like eyes rippling. Her face was so beautiful that it could steal one's soul, and adding on her slim figure but busted chest, anyone who saw her would feel their self-control slipping away. The most eye-catching thing was her long hair, which was the color of bright flames. As it danced in the wind, it created a beautiful scene. Ling Chen spaced out while looking at her, but it was not because of her looks. It was because he was deeply shocked at her appearance here, and he subconsciously said,
"It's you? Why are you here? Why can't I be here?"
The woman's lips lifted up into a smirk, giving off the airs of a goddess who had descended.
Long time no see, Adam. Do you remember me?
Yola appeared beside the woman with red hair. As she spoke, her cheeks were slightly puffed out, and she was filled with a trace of excitement but also anger. Although her words were quite calm, there was also a sense of questioning. However, her gaze seemed to jump around, not daring to maintain eye contact with Ling Chen for a long time.
You're...
Looking at the beautiful golden-haired girl, Ling Chen stared before a cute, doll-like girl with golden hair appeared in his mind.
You're... Yola? Humph, it's been 7 years already. I'm glad you still remember me.
Yola wrinkled her nose, but deep within her eyes, there was a sense of joy when she heard that he still remembered her.
Little Yola, you're the youngest out of all of us. Barring that, how could this perverted sex demon forget you after all he did to you when you were 10?
The woman with red hair said as she lightly smiled. Ling Chen, who was just about to ask how the two of them had come here, almost fainted from what the woman with red hair said. Yola's pink face became bright red, and she lowered her head and pulled on the woman with red hair's sleeve, muttering,
Big sis.
Ling Chen coughed awkwardly.
You still haven't answered my question. Why are you here?
After speaking, Ling Chen looked at Yola, who couldn't raise her head, a bit guiltily. After separating for 6.5 years, the young girl had become a beautiful young woman. The woman with red hair played with her slim fingers as she coyly said,
Back then, when we separated, we agreed that we should battle every 18 months. The first to win 2 rounds would be the victor. I won the first time, and you won the second time, and even smacked me on the butt 3 times. When the time came for the 3rd round, you never appeared. Why do you think I came here?
Ling Chen raised his eyebrows. What the woman had just mentioned was proposed by him. Back then, after Instructor Hell had died, he had wanted to go to the west, but he had wanted to go to the east. They both wished that the other person would go with them, but neither wanted to give in. After all, Ling Chen wanted to go back to find Xian Yuan Diaowu, while Eve wanted to find her biological mother. Deep down, they didn't want to be separated from each other and never meet again. As such, they proposed that they would battle once every 18 months. Whoever lost would have to unconditionally follow the other person, and the winner would be the dominant one with regard to a certain thing. They had chosen to have their battles in the virtual world. In the first battle, she had attained victory through a slight advantage. In the second battle, Ling Chen had narrowly won, and he had been seen by Yun Feng. When the time for the 3rd battle came, he was unable to make it to the battle because that was when Shui Rua had contracted Isrock disease.
You came to fight and settle that? That's only the first reason,
the woman with red hair said as her eyes narrowed.
Then what's the second reason?
Ling Chen asked as he looked at her. The woman in front of him was exceptionally beautiful, and any man who saw her would be unable to prevent themselves from drooling. However, Ling Chen knew just how terrifying of a woman was underneath the beauty. Ling Chen only feared 3 people in the whole world. One was Instructor Hell, one was the missing mad scientist, and the other was this bewitching woman with red hair in front of him.
Of course, it's to help little Yola settle her heart. She has followed me for all of these years, but she talks about you every day at least 30 times. Oh, my poor ears.
The woman with red hair made a gesture of helplessness.
Big sis!
Yola suddenly cried out, and the redness extended to her neck.
I didn't. It was you who wanted to bring me. Is there a 3rd reason? There wasn't a 3rd reason before, but now there is.
The woman with red hair smiled.
The woman opposite you in white was the Forgotten Continent's moon god representative, right? She already discovered that the lunar scourge is on you. Things are going to get quite unpleasant.
What? Ling Chen felt quite surprised, and he stared at the woman with red hair.
How do you know?
He paused and then asked,
How do you know about the lunar scourge? Because of this,
The woman with red hair opened her right hand, revealing the 3 different colored rings to Ling Chen.
you noticed me just then because of the Lunar Scourge's reaction, right? When I received this, I also heard about the Lunar Scourge in the East because the Lunar Scourge is the only item that can stand on the same level as this. When I came here, it gave off a special reaction, which told me that the legendary Lunar Scourge was actually on you.
The woman with red hair flipped her palm over, smiling as she said,
The Lachesis of the West and the Lunar Scourge of the East, one is on me, and the other is on you. What a miraculous coincidence. Latch, sis?
Ling Chen looked at the 3 different colored rings, thinking of something.
Oh,
The woman in red raised an eyebrow.
looks like you also know about it. No.
Ling Chen shook his head, his expression quite strange.
I just coincidentally heard this name before, but I didn't know what it actually was. Only today did I learn about it. Something on the same level as the Lunar Scourge must be very powerful, right?
When the Lunar Scourge had produced that reaction, Ling Chen had felt quite shocked. This was because the reaction from the Lunar Scourge told him that this was a power that could stand on equal ground with it, and even threaten it. Ling Chen knew more clearly than anyone how powerful the Lunar Scourge was, and Chi Yu had told him before that the Lunar Scourge was the evilest item in the Mystic Moon world. There was nothing else that could surpass it. As such, Ling Chen had been quite surprised when it had produced such a reaction.
Of course it's powerful.
Yola took the initiative to reply.
Before, if it wasn't for Big Sis using Lacus's power to freeze time and affect space, your friends would have all died, and more than half of Ling Tian City would have been destroyed. Plus, because Big Sis overused the Lacus's power, she was quite exhausted for a while.
Freeze time, affect space. Ling Chen almost couldn't believe his ears, and he looked at the woman with red hair in shock. The woman with red hair lightly rolled her eyes at Yola and said helplessly,
Bad Yola, why are you so eager to tell him about my trump card? I am not.
The golden-haired girl replied in a small voice. Freeze time and affect space. Just that general description sounded incredibly heaven-defying. Affecting space was all right, but freezing time, an ability to control time, only existed in stories, and it was simply impossible. Could the Lacus's item in her hands really affect time? If that was true, then that would simply be too scary. It would simply be incomprehensible. As he thought about that, Ling Chen silently touched the ring on the index finger of his right hand. The ring was called Lacus's Tear, and its effects were to nullify the negative effects from the Lacus's. Of course, that wasn't the main point. Ling Chen did not continue to ask about the Lacus's, and instead frowned as he said,
You said that the Forgotten God representative found out that the Lunar Scourge is on me? That's right.
The woman with red hair slightly smiled.
I have a little fellow who has very powerful detection abilities with respect to people's minds and hearts. It was her who told me this. Her name is Emoer, but she doesn't seem to be very interested in you, and she doesn't want to come and see you. Moreover, I think many things support this claim. Don't you think that the Forgotten God representative left a bit too quickly? After all, this is the Forgotten Continent's royal city, and after being damaged so badly, as the Moon God representative, she should have stayed and used her power to help rebuild it. However, she chose to quickly leave. This means that there's something more important than repairing the Forgotten City.
Furthermore, she gave in too easily. Even against the Underworld King, she's still a Moon God representative that represents the entire continent, and she has the Moon God clan behind her. Even if she didn't dare to offend the Underworld King, she shouldn't have given in so easily. There's only one explanation for this, which is that she had something more important that she wanted to do and had to end what was tying her up as quickly as possible.
As for how she discovered the Lunar Scourge, that's also quite simple. The lunar scourge has always been in the Forgotten Continent. Even if other moon god representative didn't know about it, as the Forgotten Continent's moon god representative, even if she didn't personally experience the Shura's devastation, how could she not know about such a terrifying thing? Of course, she has something that can detect the lunar scourge in order to prevent the lunar scourge from reappearing.
Ling Chen began to frown deeper and deeper.
According to my understanding of the lunar scourge, it's something that the Moon God clan must destroy. If the Moon God clan knows that you possess the lunar scourge, you will definitely be hunted by them at all costs.
The woman with red hair lightly smiled with a hint of schadenfreude. Thinking back to the Forgotten God representative's reaction, it was just as the woman with red hair had said. He had thought that the Forgotten God representative had given in so easily because of the Underworld King and his Underworld God canon. But after thinking about it carefully, even if she was facing the Underworld King and his Underworld God canon, she still should have maintained her pride and dignity as a Moon God representative.
I can immediately take you to where she is right now. Just then, I used Lacus's power to secretly leave a tracking ability on her. Do you need my help?
The woman with red hair asked as she grinned.
Yes.
Ling Chen raised his head and said without hesitation.
The whole world knows that you took the East Ocean Continent's Moon God representative as your mount. What great prestige. I'm sure that you'll also be able to deal with that Forgotten God representative just as easily.
The woman with red hair lifted her hand, and the lacuses shone with light as an energy that could disrupt space started to gather.
You think too highly of me. I was only able to subdue the Cherry Blossom God representative because she was attacked by the evil Black Dragon after repairing the Sunrise City's city lifeline and was almost completely exhausted, which allowed me to get a bargain. If I face off against her directly, I'm definitely not a match for the Forgotten God representative. However, Eve, with you, I'll have over 90% chance in taking down the Forgotten God representative directly.
A nostalgic look appeared on Ling Chen's face.
It's been many years since we last worked together. I'd prefer it if you'd call me Faye. Working together with you really isn't very pleasant because a chauvinist like you always blocks knives for me.
The woman with red hair said leisurely.
It's fine if you want me to help you deal with the Forgotten God representative, but you have to agree to 2 of my conditions. What are they? Number 1, in the future, you can only call me Faye, not Eve. You should know that I don't like the name Eve, just like how you don't like the name Adam. There aren't any good memories behind those 2 names. Number 2, after dealing with the Forgotten God representative, we'll have our final match.
The woman with red hair's gaze became sharp, and her battle intent filled the air. Ling Chen did not hesitate and nodded.
Very well. Okay.
The woman with red hair happily smiled.
All right, tell me about your plan to deal with her then. Can your lacuses really freeze time?
Ling Chen directly asked.
Of course. However, the time and range are limited, and I don't think that it'll be enough for us to kill her.
Eve leisurely replied.
That's good enough.
Ling Chen confidently replied.
If you can do it, just make her stay still. Leave the rest to me.
Eve glanced at him.
How are you so confident? I'm getting excited about this now. All right, let's go.
She held Yola's hand with one hand and Ling Chen's with the other. As the lacus's light flashed, the 3 of them disappeared from where they had been. At this moment, the Forgotten God representative was feeling incredibly impatient. A month ago, she had been summoned by the goddess Freedom. After returning to the Moon God Palace, the goddess Freedom had told her that it was possible that the lunar scourge had attached to a human and returned again. She was told to be attentive, and she was given a crescent moon-shaped object. When the item trembled, it meant that the lunar scourge was nearby. The lunar scourge had been destroyed 10,000 years ago, but the fear of it had never disappeared from the Moon God clan. What the Forgotten God representative had never expected was that a month later, she suddenly felt the crescent moon-shaped object tremble, and the origin of it came from Ling Chen. However, by then, the Underworld King had already appeared with the terrifying Underworld God cannon. As such, she couldn't just cry out, "Lunar Scourge!" The Lunar Scourge was the only explanation for a player being strong enough to suppress a royal city. However, with the Underworld King's protection, the Forgotten God representative was unable to do anything against him. What she needed to do was report this to the three moon goddesses. She could predict that the news that the Lunar Scourge had reappeared would cause massive waves, and the three moon goddesses would personally move out to destroy it again and kill Ling Chen. As she was traveling as quickly as possible, a light flashed before her and three people appeared in front of her. The Forgotten God representative stopped moving, and by the time she saw the three figures, she deeply frowned.
"Ling Chen, why are you here?"
she asked Ling Chen in a strict voice.
"Of course it's to come and find you. Seeing how hurried you are you preparing to return to the Moon God Palace?"
Ling Chen crossed his arms as he looked at her frivolously. Deep down, he was still marveling at the distance they had just crossed. Just as Eve had said, they had appeared before the Forgotten God representative in just an instant. It was so shocking that it was simply unbelievable. With this sort of ability, if this woman wanted to find him in the future, he wouldn't be able to run or hide. Seeing Ling Chen's stance, the Forgotten God representative seemed to notice something, and her gaze darkened.
"You want to stop me?" No. I'm not stopping you. I just want to make it so that you can never speak about what you know. If you tell the Moon God clan, it'll be very bad for me. So it really was the Lunar Scourge."
Hearing Ling Chen admit it, there was a hint of excitement in the Forgotten God representative's voice. While shocked, she rejoiced that such a coincidence had occurred. If the Lunar Scourge produced another Shura, the consequences would be too terrifying. She glanced over the three people and coldly laughed.
"Just you? You think that you can defeat me just because you have that evil item? What presumptuousness! I don't have any confidence in defeating you."
Ling Chen calmly smiled.
"But I have a way to make you very obedient. Faye, seal her!"
Perfectly resolved before Ling Chen had finished speaking, Faye's hand already begun glowing with a faint yellow light. The Forgotten God representative, who was just about to say something, suddenly froze. Her expression, gaze, hair, and clothing all froze without any movement at all. As time passed, this strange scene persisted. The entire world seemed to fall silent. Faye retracted her hand and looked at Ling Chen expectantly.
"Including where we are, time has stopped flowing in the surrounding 20 meters. Because of that, everything has fallen silent, apart from us, of course. Our bodies, as well as the things on our bodies, still experience time the same. However, I can only maintain this for 15 seconds. I'm unable to use a time barrier with a large range that lasts for a long time for another month. So what are you going to do?"
Ling Chen stared for a whole 3 seconds. The world had fallen silent, and apart from Faye's voice, there was not a single sound. The air had completely stopped moving, and in front of him, the Forgotten God representative was not moving at all. Her eyes were like lifeless crystals, and were just as bright and sharp as before, but they were not moving at all. Time had really stopped. However, his thoughts and actions were unaffected. What a terrifying ability! Freezing things in place for 5 seconds was already incredibly overpowered, and this sort of time ability was even more terrifying. Ling Chen was certain that even the three moon goddesses didn't have the ability to affect time. Living beings could control elemental essences, affect space, and could even defeat nature, but they could never resist time. Even the true gods of the ancient times didn't have such a heaven-defying ability. However, Eve, or Faye, had actually demonstrated such a terrifying ability before him. What she had wasn't just an item left behind by gods, but a forbidden item that shouldn't exist. Ling Chen didn't dare to waste those 15 seconds. He looked at the motionless forgotten god representative, and as he met her eyes, his pupils dilated, and a strange light wildly erupted forth. A strange energy shot out from Ling Chen's eyes into the forgotten god representative's mind. That's right. It was the soul-stealing curse. The forgotten god representative had discovered that he had the lunar scourge, so one way to stop her from telling the moon god clan was by killing her, let alone the question of whether he and Faye would be able to do it. If they really killed her, it would enrage the moon god clan. After finding out that the deed had been committed by Faye and him, the consequences would be the same as the lunar scourge being exposed. Even the Underworld king would not be able to protect him. In that case, the only other method was to make her completely obedient so that she would never tell the moon god clan. Only he could do such a thing. This was the second time Ling Chen had used the soul-stealing curse. He had used it the first time on the cherry blossom god representative, resulting in receiving Snow Cherry as a pet. This second time, he would be using it on another moon god representative. However, the difference was that when he used it last time, the cherry blossom god representative was on the verge of death and had no way to resist, making it easy for Ling Chen to succeed. However, he was now facing the forgotten god representative in her peak state. The soul-stealing curse's success rate was much lower than normal Feng Chen curses, and facing the powerful mysterious god-grade forgotten god representative, the chances of it succeeding were less than 10%. Moreover, if it failed, he would receive harsh penalties. However, Ling Chen had done this not because he was gambling on that 10%, but because he was more than 90% sure of success. This confidence came from Faye's ability to stop time. Under normal conditions, the chances of Ling Chen's Feng Chen curses working against the forgotten god representative would be incredibly low. Part of this was because the forgotten god representative's overall strength was much stronger than Ling Chen's overall strength, and she also had mental defenses as well. If she was frozen in place, although her body would be unable to move, her mind and mental defenses would still be active. However, freezing her in time was different. This froze everything. After being frozen in time, no matter if it was the forgotten god representative's mind, soul, will, or strength, all of them were completely frozen, making her look like a corpse. There was not even a bit of power coming out from her, nor did she have any mental defenses. Ling Chen's soul-stealing curse easily entered into her soul. Of course, even in this state, Ling Chen's chances of success were not 100%. If the other party's mental energy was not weaker than his by much, there was a large possibility of failure. An ant could not move a mountain, but a skinny person could push over a fat person if they were unprepared and unbalanced. Although the forgotten god representative's mental defenses were low, her mental energy could still resist Ling Chen's curse. If the one frozen was not the forgotten god representative but Faye, Ling Chen definitely wouldn't have dared to do such a thing because Faye's mental energy was about on par with his own. However, facing the forgotten god representative, Ling Chen felt much more confident. His overall strength was much inferior to hers, but in terms of mental strength, he wasn't inferior to anyone in the world. Time continued to pass, and Ling Chen continued to stare at the forgotten god representative without looking away. The time freeze finally ended, and the forgotten god representative, who didn't know that 15 seconds had just passed, widened her eyes as she looked into Ling Chen's eyes. She didn't know why Ling Chen's eyes were suddenly looking into hers, but she felt that there was a formless attractive force that prevented her from looking away or close her eyes. Moreover, that feeling spread to the deepest parts of her soul, making her feel completely powerless to stop or resist it. Suddenly, the forgotten god representative felt her vision becoming hazy, and her body became light. She felt like her body did not exist anymore, and only Ling Chen's eyes remained within her mind. They seemed as if they contained a boundless universe, slowly drawing her in, causing her to tumble around within them.
Ling Chen! Ling Chen!
The Forgotten God representative's eyes lost their focus, and she muttered Ling Chen's name. As she muttered his name, Ling Chen's name and image were deeply imprinted onto her heart, as well as the relationship between them. All of the negative emotions she felt towards him silently disappeared completely, replaced with an overwhelming sense of closeness and worship. There was a sense that she relied on him so much that nothing could replace him, making his image much bigger than anyone else's. His everything was more important than her own life.
Ding! Soul-stealing curse has succeeded. Target Forgotten God representative soul now has your mark imprinted on it, and she will view you as the most important person in her life and will be absolutely obedient. Ding! Remaining uses, April 6th. Phew!
The moment that the system announcement sounded out, Ling Chen let out a breath. After fighting back against the slight dizziness in his head, he delightedly smiled. If it wasn't for Fei and Yola beside him, he would have leaned back and laughed heartily for 3 minutes. Success? He had actually succeeded. He had obtained yet another moon god representative. From now onwards, this Forgotten God representative, just like Snow Cherry, would view him as the most important thing in her life and would be completely obedient to him.
What's your name?
Ling Chen edged closer and asked the Forgotten God representative. Facing Ling Chen's question, the Forgotten God representative's expression seemed a bit hazy before becoming one of nervousness and delight. Her voice also became incredibly soft as if she was shyly talking to a lover.
My real name's Mukai Ling, but I haven't used that name in a long time. Are you going to tell the Moon God clan's people about me having the Lunar Scourge?
Ling Chen asked as he smiled. A look of fear appeared on the Forgotten God representative's face, and she hurriedly shook her head.
No, that will cause you harm. I would never do such a thing. Please forgive me for my earlier offenses. I don't know why I would do such an unforgivable thing. In the future, I'll definitely be obedient and do whatever you tell me to do, and I will do whatever you tell me to do. If you're still angry, then punish me.
The Forgotten God representative lowered her head, and there was self-blame written all over her face. It seemed like she was unable to forgive herself for almost telling the Moon God clan about Ling Chen having the Lunar Scourge. Hearing the discussion between the two of them, Yola's mouth fell wide open, unable to be closed, while Fei tapped her chin, falling completely silent.
What did he do? How come she's like this? Heavens!
Yola covered her mouth, her cute eyes wide open.
It should be some sort of mind control,
Fei said with great interest. She had also been greatly shocked. Ling Chen and the Forgotten God representative's mind-blowing conversation was still going on.
Very good.
Ling Chen nodded his head in approval.
In that case, do your best to make sure that the Moon God clan never finds out that I have the Lunar Scourge, all right?
A faint look of struggle flashed in the Forgotten God representative's eyes. She was, after all, a Moon God representative of the Moon God clan, and betraying the Moon God clan was one of the greatest crimes. However, now that Ling Chen's mark had been imprinted on her soul, she was completely subservient to Ling Chen, and this struggle only lasted for an instant before it was quashed.
Yes, I won't let you down. Also, try to take care of Ling Tian City as much as possible and favor them whenever you can. If Ling Tian City faces any danger, do your best to protect it,
Ling Chen said.
I definitely will,
the Forgotten God representative replied without a hint of hesitation. Ling Chen nodded in satisfaction.
In that case, go and do what you need to do. That's right, give me something that I can use to contact you and summon you with.
Hearing that Ling Chen was telling her to leave, a look of reluctance flashed in the Forgotten God representative's eyes, but she did not refuse. Instead, she obediently took out a hairpin from within her hair and gently put it into Ling Chen's hands before turning around and leaving. She was so cute and obedient that one's heart couldn't help but ache. Ling Chen turned and waved the hairpin at Fei and Yola, happily saying,
"Perfectly resolved."
"Ridiculous situation."
"Mind control? How long does it last for?"
Fei looked at him, a mysterious light in her eyes.
"I'm not really sure, but that's pretty much it. As for the length,"
there was a pleased smile on Ling Chen's face.
"If nothing goes wrong, it should last for a lifetime." "Ah!"
Yola cried out.
"That skill's so overpowered. How could there be such an overpowered skill? That's a moon god representative." "Adam, does that skill work on players?" "Of course it does."
Ling Chen grinned. Yola subconsciously shrank back, looking terrified.
"Then will you do what you just did and secretly use that skill on us?"
"Oh!" Ling Chen's eyes lit up as he clapped his hands together.
"Thanks, right. Little Yola, you reminded me of something important. If I use this skill on little Yola, she'll become as docile and meek as a little kitten and won't be disobedient anymore." "Ah!"
Yola cried out, diving behind Fei like a little squirrel, so that she was only revealing half her head.
"I don't want that. I don't want that. All right, Yola, he's just scaring you."
Fei rolled her eyes at Ling Chen and coaxed the scared Yola out from behind her.
"This sort of skill definitely has limitations, and it most likely has a low success rate. Otherwise, he wouldn't have asked for my help. Since it affects one's mind, it must rely on breaking past one's mental defenses. With our powerful mental energy, using this skill on us will be almost impossible."
After saying this, Fei turned her attention to something else, and her gaze became passionate.
"Adam, I already helped you with what you wanted. Now, it's time for us to settle things between us. This place is quite suitable."
They were currently in the air above a desolate mountain range. There was no one in sight, and there wasn't even a bird or a beast. This meant that no matter what they did, no one would come to disturb them. Ling Chen slightly smiled as he replied,
"To be perfectly honest, I've been waiting to battle with you again because it's simply been too long since we last fought. Since we've met, this has been the longest time. During those 3 years in heaven, everyone died except us. You looked at me from the boundary of death, and I looked at you from the boundary of death. At that time, we were already fighting. We were seeing who would last the longest and become the ultimate victor. However, 3 years passed, and after being baptized in countless deaths, neither of us fell. For me, it was because of Diao Wu, and for you, it was because of your mother. They supported us while we also supported each other. During those 3 years in hell, we fought 10 or so times every day, and each fight left us with countless injuries to the point that we didn't even have the strength to stand up anymore. Are you feeling nostalgic?"
Fei gave a lightly smiled.
"Nostalgic? Not unless I'm mad."
The muscles on Ling Chen's face twisted as he gnashed his teeth.
"You left thousands, if not tens of thousands, of wounds on my body during those years. And you think I'm feeling nostalgic? As for you, you left 363 wounds on my body, not even 10% of what I gave you. Oh, it's not even 1%. Any woman has that sort of advantage, and that's even more so for a peerless beauty like me. No man can bear to be so cruel as to injure me. As for you, a big man, bleeding is something you should be doing. It's not like you'd die."
During the first half of what she said, Fei's voice was quite soft, but as she spoke, her voice became more sinister as she also gnashed her teeth.
"But why didn't you mention how many of my clothes you ruined? And you didn't even spare my underwear. When I fought with you, more than 80% of the time, I would be fighting against you naked. And you say I gave you too many wounds? I was already merciful to not have chopped off your ding-dong while you were asleep."
Yola pursed her lips, doing her best not to laugh out loud.
"Ahem, all right, I forgot to mention that small matter. After all, no one could go to where we were training apart from Yola. So what difference did having or not having clothes on make?
Ling Chen casually replied before deeply laughing.
We fought many times, and each of us won many times. However, even if we won, it would often be an incredibly tough victory. However, I should be responsible and tell you, this time, you're definitely going to lose.
Oh! Fei's eyes slightly narrowed.
Where's this confidence coming from? You'll know very soon.
Ling Chen chuckled as the dark samsara and chilling star appeared in his hands.
Fei, get ready for my attacks. This time, I'll beat you completely.
Naturally, Ling Chen wasn't confident without reason. After all, he had Lacus's tear on his finger. Back then, when he had obtained this mysterious god-grade ring, he had been incredibly dissatisfied and displeased with its plus 50% HP stat. As for the bonus effect of nullifying all negative effects and damage from the Lacuses, he had completely ignored it. However, when Eve had mentioned the name Lacuses and having a battle, he had almost laughed his head off. The Lunar Scourge was incredibly powerful, and the Lacuses was something on the same level. If it was in its complete state, it might even rival the complete Lunar Scourge. Lacus's tear provided immunity to its negative effects, and this effect was clearly quite powerful given that this effect was what gave it its qualification to be mysterious god grade. As such, because Ling Chen had this ring, the Lacuses would be useless against him. Ling Chen inwardly cheered. Heaven's will! Heaven's will! It was the heaven's will for him to beat Eve, that mad woman. That mad woman's strength most likely came from the Lacuses, just as his strength came from the Lunar Scourge. When they fight, if she suddenly finds that the Lacuses is useless against him, she will definitely be terribly shocked and cough up blood in anger. At the very least, if an item that could nullify the Lunar Scourge's effects appeared, he would cough up blood.
Humph! Let's see why you're so confident.
Fei uncrossed her arms and slowly opened them up. A blue light shone in her left hand, while a red light shone in her right hand. Two daggers of different colors appeared in her hand. One was a flame red color, while the other was an icy blue color. These two daggers were both quite short, only being the length and width of a finger. With that length, even if they were completely buried in one's body, they wouldn't be able to completely stab through it. Small weapons were easy to conceal and use, but when they were this small, they were not that easy to use. When fighting, length equals strength. Shorter weapons face a natural disadvantage against longer weapons. However, daggers were the only weapons that Fei had ever used before, and the longest ones she had ever used were 2 fingers long. Even Ling Chen could not rival her in the use of daggers. She had killed countless people with daggers, but she had never been touched by even a drop of blood. Yola conscientiously retreated far away and opened her golden eyes widely, as she nervously prepared to watch them enter battle. Over the past few years, she had essentially watched them grow together through battle, but this time, it had been over 4 years since they had last fought. What's more, this was the battle that would decide something big, so she was very excited to be spectating. What sort of result would the battle between Adam and Eve bring? Would it be like before?
According to our tradition, ladies first,
Ling Chen said somewhat carefree, feeling incredibly confident.
Don't lose too badly, my Adam.
Similarly, they also seemed to be full of confidence. Within both of their hearts, they were both sure that they would be able to defeat the other person, and easily at that. They did not show any courtesy, and she slowly brought her daggers together in front of her. As her daggers started to move around, her gaze became as cool as snow, and there wasn't even a trace of emotion. A sharp aura filled the space and expanded outwards. It was no less remarkable than the sword chi that Xianyuan Dia Wu gave off. Following this, Fei moved. The only person in the world who could make Fei make the first move was Ling Chen. Just as Fei moved, the frozen space seemed to be completely shattered. An icy gale swept out, and only an afterimage was left where Faye had been, with her real body completely vanishing.
Dimensional fracture.
Faye's voice sounded out from above Ling Chen. In that instant, a strange feeling assaulted Ling Chen from all directions, and a piercing sound struck at his ears. Cha! With Ling Chen at the center, the 20 meters around him was suddenly filled with tens of jet-black cracks. That's right, cracks had appeared in space. In that instant, it looked as if a mirror had been shattered. What's more, the cracks were not merely cracks but black holes.
Ah!
Yola's mouth fell open as she cried out. She subconsciously covered her mouth, muttering to herself,
"How could it be Big Sis said that she would get him a surprise at the end? So why is she doing this right from the beginning? Dimensional fracture is almost impossible to block. It can't end like this, right?"
The black hole fractures were terrifying, but they only lasted for a moment. Very soon, the fractures completely disappeared. However, as the fractures disappeared, Ling Chen remained where he was, standing completely straight and even smiling. No damaged figures rose up from his body, and he looked completely fine. Faye stared in surprise, and Yola's eyes widened even more. The damage from space itself being fractured was simply terrifying, and even celestial-grade bosses or normal Heaven's End-grade bosses would be crushed into pieces. Furthermore, this sort of attack was completely unblockable, and the space around the target would be locked, making it impossible for them to escape. And yet, Ling Chen looked completely fine. This caused both Faye and Yola to be completely surprised. As the space shattered, Ling Chen started to sweat cold sweat. To be able to even shatter space, what sort of ridiculous power was this? Even in his most powerful state, and using his most powerful skills, he was only able to cause ripples in space. Fracturing space was simply impossible. And yet, this madwoman's attack had completely shattered space. It seemed that not only could the Lachesis use spatial energy to teleport, but it could also attack as well. If it wasn't for Lachesis' tear, there was a 90% chance that Ling Chen would have been insta-killed. The remaining 10% chance was that the evil god's mask would have been able to reflect even this sort of spatial damage. Could this ability be even more overpowered? No wonder why she was so confident. However, this mad woman was simply too savage. She had tried to insta-kill him from the very beginning. What a sinister woman. A mad woman was indeed a mad woman. Ling Chen wiped the cold sweat from his forehead before rushing towards Faye like a bolt of lightning.
"It's my turn. Moon! Shadow!"
The lunar scourge erupted out with a silver light, instantly covering the 60 meters around them, Faye included. Even without the Libra orb activating, the 5 seconds that Moon Shadow would freeze Faye was more than enough for him to trample her. "Since you tried to be so cruel, don't blame me for being merciless. Since you tried to insta-kill me, don't blame me for insta-killing you." Ling Chen smirked and slowed down as he swung Dark Samsara and Chilling Star towards Faye. Ping! Ping! However, Ling Chen instead felt recoil, which caused his unprepared body to tremble. His Dark Samsara and Chilling Star had not been able to hit Faye, and they were instead accurately pincered by her dual daggers. An icy coldness and a berserk hotness rushed at him from both sides, causing him to release all of the strength gathered in his arms. With a dull explosion, he released the heavy force behind both of his attacks, blasting both of them away from each other. After they stabilized their bodies, neither person attacked, and they instead stared at each other. This time, it was Ling Chen's turn to feel flabbergasted. Currently, Moon Shadow had a range of 62 meters, and he was 10,000% sure that Faye had been covered by it. And yet, she was still able to move freely. Not only was she able to quickly and accurately parry his attacks, she was able to counterattack. Moon Shadow's effects were absolute no matter what grade or level the target was. Ever since he had obtained the Lunar Scourge, Moon Shadow had never failed him before. No matter how powerful the enemies had been, Moon Shadow had always completely frozen them without exception. So what was going on here? How come Faye could move within Moon Shadow as if she was wholly unaffected?
How come you can resist my Moon Shadow? How come you can resist my dimensional fracture?
The two of them simultaneously yelled out before falling back into silence. Following this, their gazes became quite strange.
I say, surely you didn't obtain something that can counter the Lunar Scourge, right?
Ling Chen testily asked. He only thought of this because he was only able to resist Faye's spatial power due to the Lachesis tear. Faye, who was just about to say something, pursed her lips and silently looked at him for a while before replying.
I was about to ask you the same thing. However, seeing your expression, I think I've come to a ridiculous answer.
After saying this, she pulled at her neck, revealing a pendant that was hidden by her red dress. The pendant was in the shape of a crescent moon, and it was snow white and flawless as if it was carved out of pure jade. The instant Ling Chen looked at it, he felt a sense of familiarity. After slightly frowning, he realized where this sense of familiarity came from. Its shape was exactly the same as the one on the side of the Lunar Scourge. Even the size was roughly the same. The pendant's description was displayed by Faye to Ling Chen. Sacred Moon, type, necklace, grade, mysterious god, equipment requirements, unknown. A secret weapon created at the same time as the Lunar Scourge. It seems to have been created by the Lunar Scourge's creator in order to prevent him from being harmed by the Lunar Scourge as a result of not being able to control it completely by suppressing the Lunar Scourge. It traveled to a western continent by unknown means. Stats: MP plus 50%, negates all damage and negative effects from Lunar Scourge. Ling Chen's mouth started to twitch, and following this, even his eyelids started to twitch. He looked at the sacred moon with a complicated expression, and then looked at Faye, who had an equally complicated look in her eyes. Ling Chen stretched out his hand and displayed the Lachesis tear to her while breathed raggedly.
What a ridiculous situation.
Final battle.
Where did you get this from?
Ling Chen asked as his face twisted.
I wanted to ask you where you got that ring from.
Faye rubbed her forehead.
I asked you first. From a monster, and you? Also from a monster. I obtained the Lunar Scourge, and you obtained the Lachesis. I obtained the Lachesis tear, and you obtained the sacred moon. Fudge! Could this be even more ridiculous?
Ling Chen felt like he was going to go crazy. This was like a ridiculous drama.
It's useless for you to get all angry at me. I'm also quite shocked. Could it be that you were acting so confidently before because of this?
Faye was completely speechless. Seeing the Lachesis tear and sacred moon in the other person's hands, their battle intent was greatly reduced. Ling Chen never thought that the Lunar Scourge would have a perfect counter, and Faye never expected the Lachesis to have a counter either. After staring at each other for a while, both of them felt quite frustrated.
Looks like we're really bound by fate.
After staring at each other for a while, that was all Ling Chen could say, his voice full of wonder. They had met in heaven, and they had both survived. One had become Adam, the other Eve. They had supported each other through heaven and hell, and they viewed each other as their only rival. And now, in this world called Mystic Moon, their experiences had been so similar as well.
Are we still going to fight?
The sharpness in her tone was almost completely gone.
Looks like the heavens don't want us to fight. However, we still haven't had that final battle, and since we dragged it out for so long, we need to have a conclusion. It's just that this is the virtual world, so there are many things that won't be fair if we use the things in the virtual world. My Lunar Scourge is useless against you, and your Lachesis is useless against me. It's almost as if we're being told that we shouldn't be using things from the virtual world to settle this final match, but a fairer method,"
Ling Chen slowly said as he slowly raised his chest. Evidently, he had thought of some sort of idea.
"Are you talking about that?"
Faye's gaze also became strange. When she mentioned that, she didn't seem to mind either.
"Of course it's that. To us, that is the fairest way. We haven't battled each other in quite a while, so do you dare?"
A provocative look appeared in Ling Chen's eyes. Faye smiled back.
"It's not like this is the first time we've used that. Why would I not dare? However, Adam, don't forget about the consequences for losing."
Ling Chen raised his eyebrows as he suddenly asked,
"Faye, back then, you wanted to go back to your hometown to find your mother. Did you find her in the end?"
Hearing Ling Chen's words, Yola looked at Faye worriedly. Faye did not immediately reply, but the slight smile on her face slightly disappeared, and she softly said,
"I did. It was 2 months after you left, but by then, she was on her dying breath. A month later, she died. Even though Liz and Cassandra were with me, and I had some of the mad scientist's equipment, they were unable to do anything."
Ling Chen frowned and felt that he had asked something that he shouldn't have asked. He cautiously asked,
"What happened to your mother? Why was she on her dying breath?"
Faye closed her eyes, going back to that memory that she did not want to touch again. Apart from Ling Chen, if anyone else had asked her, she would not have answered them.
"Back then, when I was taken to heaven, Mother was completely heartbroken, and she looked for me every day. She blamed herself for my disappearance every day. She never gave up looking for me for 7 years because she believed that I was still alive. Perhaps this is a sense of maternal instinct. It was just that because of all of the effort, tediousness, self-blame, tears, and despair that she endured over the 7 years, when I found her and when she found me, her mind and body had withered like that of a person who was 100 years old. I stayed with her day and night for an entire month, and I could only watch as she left me."
Ling Chen.
"However, that was also good. She suffered so much, so she deserved to rest. At least, during that 1 month, she was very happy. Up until she departed, she always had a gentle and warm smile on her face. After that, I no longer had any regrets, and I brought Yola and the others to find their family. At the same time, I expanded our power and protected those who we wanted to protect and killed those who we wanted to kill."
After speaking, Faye opened her eyes, looking completely expressionless. Ling Chen stared for a few moments before saying,
"Your mother, it's good that she's able to rest now. I'm sure she's in the real heaven now."
Faye slightly smiled and said softly,
"All mothers in the world are more or less like that. A mother's love towards her children is not something that anything else can replace. These years, what I've admired most are those who still have mothers because they can at the very least still see their mothers and feel their mother's love. They still have an opportunity to treat them with filial piety and protect them. What I hate most is seeing children who abandon their mothers when they need them the most. I always kill such people when I see them. Those sorts of people don't deserve to continue living. Forget it. To someone who lost his mother when he was born, the concept of a mother doesn't mean much, and you wouldn't understand."
Ling Chen blankly stared ahead of him with a stiff expression on his face, and he did not say anything for a while.
"Oh, what's wrong? From your expression, you seem quite touched,"
Faye said half-teasingly. Ling Chen shook his head, feeling incredibly complicated. He settled his emotions down as he replied,
"You answered my question, so I should tell you about some things as well. 7 years ago, Hell didn't die." "Oh!"
Faye's eyebrows leapt up, and Yola cried out. Following this, Faye calmly replied,
"I don't know why, but I don't feel that surprised. After all, Instructor Hell wouldn't die so easily. He was saved by the mad scientist and was modified to become a terrifying half-cyborg. Half a year ago, he found me and tried to kill me. After becoming a half-cyborg, his mind was twisted, and he was no longer the instructor Hell who had no openings. However, he became much more powerful to the point that I almost couldn't fight back, and I was almost killed by him. However, afterwards, he died in front of me. I felt that it was me who killed him, but even now, I have no idea how I killed him. However, he's completely dead this time. His body has been completely shattered, and even the mad scientist would not be able to bring him back. After speaking, Ling Chen let out a light breath. Whenever he thought back to the scene of him fighting with Instructor Hell, he always felt a chill within his heart. Half cyborg? The mad scientist actually created something so movie-like? Faye was also quite shocked. After Instructor Hell died, the only person who made her feel true fear was the mad scientist. He wore white-rimmed glasses and was so hunchbacked that he stood at almost a 90-degree angle with his thin, skinny body, which looked so strengthless, and yet he deserved the title of demon. No, he was even more terrifying than a demon. I've also been looking for the mad scientist all these years. If he could be found so easily, he wouldn't be the mad scientist anymore, Ling Chen replied. That's right. After so many years, I've found nothing, but even if it's the mad scientist, he can't be completely flawless all the time. One day, I'll find him. If he doesn't die, my heart will never be at ease. I'm sure you feel the same, Faye said seriously. Ling Chen nodded in complete agreement. After mentioning the mad scientist, the atmosphere became a bit gloomy, and Ling Chen said, after talking about so many other things, it's time to get down to business. Same rules. The final battle will be decided by 3 rounds. This was suggested by you, so don't regret it. A dangerous look appeared within Faye's eyes. In that moment, the peaceful atmosphere once again became tense. Both of their eyes became as sharp as knives, and 2 shocking waves of killing intent spread out, causing the surrounding temperature to drop. As their icy cold killing intent collided, Ling Chen and Faye inched towards each other from 30 or so positions away to just 10, then to 5, then to 3. By the side, Yola's heart was rapidly thumping. Back in Hell, she would see Ling Chen and Faye fight almost every day, so she could immediately tell what they were about to do. Heavens! They were going to use this sort of method to determine victory? Who would win? She felt so nervous. When the 2 of them were just 1 meter away from each other, the air suddenly froze. Both of their weapons disappeared, and they stared at each other, raising their arms as they shouted simultaneously. Scissors, paper, rock! Scissors, paper, rock! Scissors, paper, rock! Temporarily leaving when the Forgotten City was going through its disaster, Ling Tian City was preparing to do its post-battle repairs. Throughout this process, news related to the Forgotten City continuously entered Ling Tian City, causing everyone to feel both shocked and delighted. However, they simply could not imagine how Ling Chen had made a royal city suffer so terribly. The fairies who had died were unable to come back to life, but those who had lost loved ones knew at the very least that those greedy and selfish humans had been cruelly punished. When Ling Chen returned to Ling Tian City was still quite silent. The city gates and teleportation channel were still closed, and they might not open for quite a few days. There was an air of sorrow and sadness hanging around the city, and the fairies were all gathered together, sending off their loved ones, friends, and lovers. The fairies, who had lived in peace for thousands of years, had seen the fairies beside them die after coming to Ling Tian City for just a few months. This sort of grief was not something that they would get over within a short period of time. Seeing this, Ling Chen couldn't help but blame himself. He could only silently vow that he would not allow such a thing to happen a second time. After concluding his final battle with Faye, Ling Chen returned to Ling Tian City and notified Yunming Xian and the others that the Forgotten City had been taught a lesson to the point that it had trembled
and would not dare to offend Ling Tian City again. In fact, they would apologize and provide compensation. Afterwards, Ling Chen introduced them to someone, a woman who gave off an extremely enchanting air and had red hair and red clothes.
My name is Fei Sharon Capalia. You can just call me Fei. This is my little sister, Yola Shirley Capalia.
Fei gave a simple introduction, and she also introduced little Yola. Standing in front of so many people, they didn't seem awkward at all, and they instead seemed quite natural and unrestrained. Even though Fei didn't give off the sharp aura she had when facing off against Ling Chen, there was a natural sense of pride and dignity about her. When people saw her for the first time, they could help but feel inferior. Before everyone could ask who she was, Yun Feng leapt out and pointed at Fei, almost shrieking.
Why, Yuri? You're Eve. Eve.
Very few people in the world had seen Eve's true appearance before, most of which were the people by her side. Yun Feng was evidently one of the rare exceptions. This was because when he had determinedly climbed up Dark Cloud Mountain, which other players only looked at but didn't even think about climbing, he had coincidentally seen the second showdown between Ling Chen and Fei. Although he hadn't seen Eve's face, her red hair and weapons allowed him to confirm her identity. Although it had been 4 years since he had last seen Fei, she had not changed much over the past 4 years, and Eve's identity was not something that Yun Feng could easily forget. Given Fei's red hair, the aura around her, and the way she spoke, apart from Eve, who else could she be? When Yun Feng cried out, everyone stared in shock. Who was Eve? Before Ling Tian had shocked the world, she had been the god among players. She was a peak-level player who had been crowned with the title Demon Goddess, a legend who could not be surpassed or even challenged. Her name had become a synonym for ultimate player, and she was what allowed players of the West to look down on players of the East. Now that this legendary name had been called out by Yun Feng, almost everyone present did not dare to believe their ears. They looked at Fei's red hair, and everyone fell silent. After all, Eve's most striking characteristic was her flame-red hair.
That's right, she's indeed Eve. No one would be able to mimic her aura,
Xianyuan Diawu said as she looked at Fei. During the international mock battles, she had faced off against Fei before. Eve had been the only person to ever defeat her apart from Ling Chen. Ling Chen did not find it surprising that Yun Feng and Xianyuan Diawu would recognize her, and everyone else's reactions were within his expectations as well. He nodded as he said,
That's right, she's Eve. However, don't worry, she's an old friend of mine. She's just here to meet you all, and she isn't our enemy. Are you really Eve? The demon goddess Eve?
Xiaoqi covered her mouth with one hand, unable to believe what she had heard. When she spoke, her eyes were filled with tiny stars. Eve was the most powerful female player, and she has been the idol and pride of countless female players.
That's right, little sister Flame Empress Chi-Chi,
they replied with a smile. Although she was here to meet everyone, she already knew a lot about all of them.
The legendary Eve has come to Ling Tian City. This is half a pleasant surprise and half a terrifying shock,
Li Xiaoshui said as she looked at Fei before looking at Ling Chen.
The renowned Lulan Queen doesn't need to feel scared. As long as this man called Ling Tian doesn't die, we'll only be friends.
Fei lightly glanced at Ling Chen as she smiled.
Eve, welcome to Ling Tian City. Looks like you've long since known Ling Tian,
Yunming Xian slowly said as she took a step forwards.
It's my honor to meet you, Lady Yunming Xian, the most famous woman in the world right now. You're quite right. I've known this man for a long time, over 10 or so years now,
Fei said casually. After saying this, Li Xiaoshui and Xianyuan Diawu's expressions both slightly changed.
I can attest to that,
Yun Feng jumped out and said excitedly.
I don't know about before, but they've known each other since at least 4 years ago. For years ago, I saw the battle between Ling Chen and Eve. That was a true legend-level battle. After seeing that battle, even now I can't forget about it."
After speaking, he looked over at the silent, golden-haired girl by Faye's side. His pupils dilated as he once again cried out,
"By Eve's side, golden hair, golden eyes, could you be the golden-eyed war god?"
Everyone was staring at Faye, while Skyfall had been staring at Yola the entire time with a look of suspicion in his eyes. When he heard Yun Feng cry out golden-eyed war god, he jumped up as if he was stabbed by a needle, and he uncontrollably yelled,
"Fudge! Why, you're the golden-eyed war god. You're a female player? And a girl at that?"
Everyone's gaze fell on Yola, causing her face to become slightly red. Seeing that everyone was staring at her, she lowered her head and protested in a small voice,
"Isn't China's Sword Emperor also a female player?"
Yola's reply confirmed that she was indeed the golden-eyed war god. Everyone lapsed into shock again, and Skyfall almost fell to the ground. He covered his face and screamed,
"How could it be like this? My goal, my motivation, heavens!"
Apart from Ling Chen, who had a look of confusion on his face, everyone knew why Skyfall was reacting like this. In the last international mock battles, Skyfall had been defeated by the golden-eyed war god in just 3 attacks. Back then, no one had known or expected that the golden-eyed war god was actually a female player. What was even more outrageous was that Yola currently only looked about 17 or 18 years old, so she would have been 15 or 16 years old when she had annihilated Skyfall. This almost caused Skyfall's entire world to crumble. Back then, he had been unresigned in his loss, and he had vowed to wash away his shame with blood. Only now did he know that his opponent back then had been a 15 or 16-year-old girl. In the last international mock battle, the number 1 player was naturally Faye, and the number 2 player was Yola. Although Yola was the youngest, even Guya would not be able to defeat her. This was because Yola grew up beside Adam and Eve and spent the most time watching them fighting. She only ever fought against the 2 of them, and adding on her frightening talent, her strength grew at a monstrous rate. At the same time, Adam and Eve were the 2 people she relied on the most. Back then, when they separated, she was the one who had cried the most.
"Since we've gotten to know you all, we should be going."
Faye took Yola's hand as she calmly looked at Ling Chen. Ling Chen slightly raised his eyebrows, but he did not say anything.
"Go? You're Ling Tian's friend, so you're Ling Tian City's friend. Why are you going right after you've come? At least give us a chance to show our hospitality."
No one thought that the famous Eve would come and go so suddenly, and Yunming Xian spoke out to ask her to stay.
"Thank you, Lady Yun, but I still have many other important things to do, so I must leave now. I'm sure that we'll spend a lot of time together in the future. As such, goodbye."
If anyone knew what sort of person Faye was, he or she would know just how rare it was her to even come here in the person. Faye was already a proud person, and adding on her natural arrogance as a woman, Faye was even prouder than Ling Chen. Very few people could make Faye speak so courteously, and after speaking, she turned and vanished along with Yola. During this entire period of time, Ling Chen did not try to ask her to stay at all.
Eve. It was actually Eve. We actually met such a legendary person, and she says she's friends with us."
Against the Sky and Judging Sky said excitedly, with a look of disbelief on their faces. Even people like them held deep respect towards the name Eve.
"Big brother Ling Tian, Eve said you've known each other for more than 10 years. Is this true? How did you meet each other? Why is she so powerful?"
Shao Qi asked curiously. Xian Yuan Diawu's eyes slowly became dim. 10 or so years ago was right when she and Ling Chen had been separated. The Eve in the virtual world was indeed that Eve. No wonder she was so powerful. Just like Ling Chen, she had gone through a cruel baptism that no ordinary human would be able to survive. She had been turned into a non-human monster.
I've known her for around 13 years. Back then, she was just a 10-year-old girl, but she was much stronger than normal girls. When I first met her, she was on her dying breath, but her eyes scared me.
Ling Chen slowly said as he thought back to that time.
I feel very curious. She's evidently a player from the West, so why did she come here? What makes me feel even more curious is why she especially came over here to meet everyone.
Li Xiaoshui asked. Ling Chen replied,
About 7 years ago, we made an agreement to battle every 18 months in a best out of 3. We coincidentally met before and had our final battle. Just then, she was carrying out her obligations.
What?
You just fought?
Yun Feng rushed over, asking in anticipation.
What was the result? Who won? Air.
Ling Chen tapped his chin and said calmly,
I didn't win.
What?
Didn't win? Even if it's Eve, but you're so powerful, how could you not beat her?
Yun Feng exclaimed in shock. Everyone else also looked dumbfounded. Ling Chen rolled his eyes before replying.
I never said I lost. In that last battle, we had 3 rounds. She won the first one, I won the second one, and we tied for the third one. Moreover, before we fought, we agreed that no matter what happened, there would only be 3 rounds, so no one won nor lost. So it was like this.
Yun Feng nodded blankly. Compared to being defeated by Eve, he could accept this result.
No less than expected from Eve. Even against you, your battle resulted in a tie.
Huh? Ling Chen suddenly mysteriously laughed.
Even though it was a tie, the final victory was mine.
Everyone felt quite confused.
You'll all see soon,
Ling Chen said as he laughed. He did not explain what he meant, but the scene of their final battle appeared in his mind.
Fei, since there's nothing keeping you there, come to where I am. It was a tie after those 3 rounds, so why should I come to where you are? Because I need you. Is this reason not enough? Fei, Yola, take me to see your friends.
They still brought Yola away, but Ling Chen did not feel disappointed. He was instead filled with passion and anticipation. He was sure that Fei would be back soon and bring many more people. Su'er's Premonition at the other side of Ling Tian City, within the dwarves' own district, they received an incredible piece of news. All 30,000 dwarves were gathered together. The attendance hadn't been so high even during the meeting where they discussed temporarily relocating from Ling Tian City. At the center of the massive crowd, there was a jet-black cannon. All of the dwarves were fixedly staring at it, not willing to even blink. It was as if they were looking at some supremely holy item, and some of the elderly dwarves had streams of tears running down their faces, and they were so excited that their bodies trembled.
Underworld God Cannon, our ancestors' greatest achievement, the pride of our entire dwarf clan,
Chief Dillo excitedly shouted out. His dark hand continuously caressed the crude-looking cannon, his movements exceedingly cautious and gentle. Inwardly, he felt as if his heart was going to explode. Neither he nor any of the other dwarves thought that they would one day be able to see the ultimate creation of their ancestors. All of the dwarves' hearts were greatly attracted by the Underworld God Cannon, but even in their excitement, no one dared to rush up and touch it. After all, this Underworld God Cannon was a sacred item to them, and they felt that they could only worship it and did not even have the right to touch it. In fact, none of them even noticed Ling Chen as he arrived.
Had good son-in-law, you finished with your business?
Seeing Ling Chen come over, the Underworld King popped out from who knows where and stood in front of him. Thinking back to the fact that this continent's moon god representative would be completely loyal to him in the future, Ling Chen couldn't help but smile.
Of course it's done, eh? You just gave the Underworld God Cannon to them like this? What else would I do?
The Underworld King rolled his eyes.
Aren't you afraid of them being unwilling to return it to you afterwards? To the dwarves, the underworld god canon is a godlike existence. Look at their reactions,
Ling Chen said as he looked over.
Che!
The underworld king casually smirked.
When your elder first started having dealings with the dwarves, your 18th generation ancestor wasn't even born yet. How could I not know what sort of people they are? Greed and oath-breaking aren't part of their nature. Okay.
Since the underworld king had said this, there was no need for Ling Chen to say anything else. He said confidently,
Since you trust the dwarf clan so much, leaving the underworld god canon here for 48 hours should be no problem, right? I'm sure that with their intelligence and talent, as well as the blueprint, they'll be able to create another underworld god canon during this period of time. As for the materials, I heard that the underworld god canon's main material is the underworld blood lake's underworld god mysterious blood metal, so
the underworld king glared at him and roared.
There's plenty of it in the underworld blood lake. Take as much of it as you want. Wonderful. Oh, and also,
Ling Chen looked at Yunmeng Xian and the others not too far away and said in a low voice,
Please don't call me son-in-law in front of my friends. You should know that if this matter is brought up, it'd make things quite complicated.
Oh, the underworld king slowly nodded, looking very understanding. Just as Ling Chen let out a breath of relief, the underworld king put his hand on Ling Chen's shoulder and shouted with a booming voice,
Good son-in-law, I've married my daughter to you, so make sure you treat her well. Son-in-law? Son-in-law?
Yunmeng Xian, Shao Qi, Su'er, Xian Yuan Diawu, and the others all stared with wide eyes towards Ling Chen and the underworld king.
TTT, this uncle is the underworld's underworld king. I'm sure you've heard of him. He's very strong, but after leaving the underworld, his mind isn't too good and calls everyone his son-in-law. You should go comfort the fairies, and I'll take him around Ling Tian City.
After speaking, Ling Chen grabbed the underworld king and ran, inwardly cursing him 1,000,000,000 times. The underworld king, who had only planned to stay in the Ling Tian City for a day, was convinced by Ling Chen to stay for 2 days, after which he left with the underworld god canon. Following this, 3,000 dwarves brought the blueprints and sufficient materials and locked themselves away. These dwarves were all elites of the elites, and had the highest talent for forging within the entire clan. The remaining dwarves all sighed in disappointment, and threw themselves into doing repairs for the Ling Tian City. 3 days later, the Forgotten Emperor publicly apologized to Ling Tian City, and vowed to never take the initiative to offend Ling Tian City again. He also promised to provide compensation within 2 months. Instantly, the entire world was set into shock. The human with the most authority in the Forgotten Continent, the Forgotten Emperor, had publicly apologized and had made promises to pay compensation. This had never happened before in the history of the Forgotten Continent. This news was completely unbelievable to everyone, and very soon, everyone realized why the Forgotten Emperor had done something so shocking. The Forgotten Continent's moon god representative, the Forgotten God representative, who had not appeared in 1,000 years, publicly appeared above the Forgotten City. She rebuked the Forgotten Emperor for his wrongdoings and announced that she would protect the player's city, Ling Tian City. All those who acted against it would be acting against her, the Forgotten God representative. This time, everyone, including Ling Tian City's people, were completely shocked. The Forgotten God representative had publicly declared that she would protect this city, and that acting against the city would be acting against her. This was completely unprecedented. With these words, who in the entire Forgotten Continent would dare to offend Ling Tian City? No one knew just what Ling Tian City had done to earn the favor of the Forgotten God representative. But what was undeniable was that after this day, Ling Tian City's fame and status would skyrocket. Although it was created by players, in just a few months, its overall position had surpassed even Forgotten City. 10 days later, the repairs were complete, and after also expanding a little bit, Ling Chen City was once again open to countless eager players. At the same time, the trade route between Ling Chen City and the Underworld was established on that day, and the results were even better than what Ling Chen had expected. The things from the Underworld that gave special effects and stats caused players to scream with joy and amazement, and the attractiveness of Ling Chen City grew even more. After reopening Ling Chen City, the number of people coming into Ling Chen City was much greater than it had been during its initial opening. This brought even more fame, prestige, and riches. Over the past few days, Ling Chen did not go anywhere, and he instead put most of his time in the game into Ling Chen City in order to rid himself of some of the guilt he felt. He also spent his time whispering sweet things to Diao Wu, spending time with Chi Chi and Suer, and playing with Tian Tian and Sha Sha, or playing a game with Leng Er. He had been incredibly relaxed. However, there was nothing he could do about this. Before Suer could use her Heaven's Secret's power to search for the next orb, he wouldn't go out to look for it himself and waste time.
Suer, are you not able to use your power yet?
After half a month, Ling Chen finally couldn't help but ask Suer.
Oh?
Suer seemed to be spacing out, and after hearing Ling Chen's question, she had a small fright before shaking her head.
Not yet. However, my power has been growing, so it should be soon. It'll be in less than a week. All right, don't push yourself too hard, Su, Ling Chen said as he smiled. Before, Suer could only use her power about once every month, and the decrease to 20 days was already a pleasant surprise. He looked at Suer earnestly as he asked, Su, there seems to be something on your mind. Did something happen? No. Suer hurriedly shook her head. However, she was unable to cover the flustered look in her eyes. She slightly lowered her head and said suddenly,
Big brother Ling Chen City will be fine in the future, right? Of course, I can promise you that. Even if the entire Forgotten City attacks, we won't have to fear them.
Ling Chen nodded confidently. The Forgotten Emperor had been scared out of his wits, and he had used the soul-stealing curse on the Forgotten God representative. There was also the Underworld backing him up, so no matter if it was players or NPCs, no one would ever dare to offend Ling Chen City again. It would be difficult for something to happen to Ling Chen City.
Then I must be overthinking. That must be it.
Suer's expression relaxed, and she sweetly smiled.
Overthinking? What did you think of?
Ling Chen sat down beside her.
It's just that. It's just that my mind has been quite chaotic recently, and my heart has been beating quite quickly, making me feel afraid that something bad is going to happen. I'm sure I'm just overthinking it,
Suer said embarrassedly. Ling Chen slightly frowned. If anyone else had said this, he wouldn't have paid it much mind, but Suer, she was the sole successor to the Heaven's Secret sect, which had the power to look at Heaven's secrets. They were cared for by the Heavens, and would have a premonition before something happened. As such, whenever the Heaven's Secret sect's people felt something, it definitely wouldn't be overthinking. The Heaven's Secret's power that Suer displayed each time had been incredibly accurate, and had never failed before. So what was this ominous feeling about?
Su.
Ling Chen's voice became serious.
When you can use your Heaven's Secret's power again, don't use it to help me find the things I want. Use it to see if anything bad will happen to any of us.
Ah? Suer looked up at him in confusion.
Don't think about it too much. I'm just taking precautions,
Ling Chen said as he smiled.
It doesn't matter if it takes me a bit longer to find what I want. The safety of everyone is much more important. If there's nothing, that's fine. But if there really is something, we will be able to prepare for it, and little Su won't have to worry anymore. Okay.
Suer meekly nodded.
The Yun family's greed. Perhaps no one else would think too much when he or she heard what Shura said. After all, it was possible that she was still feeling sensitive about what happened to Ling Tian City. However, Ling Chen was unable to disregard this. Even as he walked to the administrative district, he was still thinking about what Shura had said, and he thought of all sorts of possibilities. However, the Forgotten God representative had definitely been affected by the soul-stealing curse, and the Forgotten Emperor definitely wouldn't dare to attack again even if he was 10 times as brave. Even if he did go mad and attack Ling Tian City, he wouldn't be able to be much of a threat. What's more, Ling Chen had the Underworld supporting him, so even the Dragon Clan and Moon God Clan would have to think about it seriously before attacking. At that moment, Ling Chen saw 3 middle-aged men walking towards him. The 3 of them evidently were not battle profession players, and they had very low levels. However, they were dressed in expensive clothing and jewelry, and they didn't have a single piece of battle equipment on them. The 3 of them walked side by side, and their faces were raised, not even bothering to look at Ling Chen. It seemed like they were quite used to being proud and arrogant. Seeing the direction in which they were walking, Ling Chen slightly frowned, slowed down, and watched them as they stopped in front of the administrative district's main tower.
Apologies, this is where the leaders of the city do important business, so if you do not have an appointment, please do not enter.
This was the center of Ling Tian City's administrative district, the core of Ling Tian City. Yunmeng Xian, Li Xiaoshui, and others who were working on the development of the city were in here, and those who were standing guard naturally were not ordinary players, but 2 young celestial grade fairies. Although these 3 middle-aged men had come over quite suddenly, the fairies still courteously warned them not to come closer. However, the middle-aged man on the right angrily yelled,
"Get out of the way, and let us in!"
The 2 fairies simultaneously frowned, but they continued to speak in a polite tone.
"Without an appointment or the lady's permission, no one is allowed to enter here. Apologies, I don't want to repeat myself."
The middle-aged man who had spoken became quite angry. From the look of it, he was used to being higher than everyone else, and he put no one in his eyes. These 2 fairies looked almost the same as humans, so they were taken to be 2-player guards. As such, let alone speaking courteously, they didn't even put these fairies in their eyes at all.
"Immediately get out of the way, and take us to see the lady of the city. Not everyone can be stopped by you. Do you know who I am? The lady of your city is my niece. This is her 3rd uncle, and this is her father. If you waste our time, we'll make you regret it."
In the distance, Ling Chen still hadn't left, and his eyes started to narrow. At that moment, Xiao Qi happened to walk by. Just as she was about to call out to him, Ling Chen hurriedly waved her over and made a signal not to speak. Xiao Qi stared for a moment before looking over, and her face fell as her cheeks puffed out angrily.
"Humph. It's big sister Meng Xian's father and 2 uncles. They actually came here to see her. I'm sure they're not here for anything good." "AI, don't say such things. These 2 little brothers evidently don't know who they are. After all, they're just diligently doing their job."
The middle-aged man in the middle spoke, speaking somewhat pleasantly to the 2 fairy guards.
"2 little brothers, I am Lady Yun's father, and I have urgent business with her. Please take us to see her immediately."
As Ling Tian City developed, Lady Yunmeng Xian's name was also known across all the lands. Adding on her breathtaking beauty, she became world-famous. When Fei called her the most famous woman in the world, she was not exaggerating at all. Her identity as China's Yun Family Financial Group's heiress was also made known, causing the Yun Family Financial Group to also greatly benefit. Although Ling Tian City had only been established for 2 months, the benefits that the Yun Family Financial Group had received due to being associated with Yunmeng Xian were not small at all. As Yunmeng Xian's relatives, especially close relatives, They felt that their status had been lifted up as well. As Yunming Xian's father, Yun Zhengfan was incredibly pleased, and he started to look down on even the Li family, who he had only been able to look up at before. So what if the Li family was powerful in the past? The Yun family has the most powerful daughter in the world, and the Li family's daughter is my daughter's subordinate. Now, the way everyone looked at him was completely different. Because of the massive influence that Ling Tian City had within the virtual world, countless rich and powerful people, including those whose statuses were far above his, tried to curry favor with him so that they could establish themselves within Ling Tian City. This made Yun Zhengfan feel giddy with joy, and he felt that he didn't have to put anyone in his eyes. Facing these two-player guards, they revealed their identities, expecting to scare these guards senseless. They fully expected the guards to start acting humble and immediately take them to see Yunming Xian, but the two fairies only calmly glanced at them. The three middle-aged men's arrogance angered even them, and standing guard was their job no matter who it was that approached. One of the fairies expressionlessly said, "I don't care who you are. If you don't have an appointment or the lady's permission, please immediately leave this place. If you don't leave, we'll be required to force you out." "You?" Yun Zhengfan's expression froze, and his face became a pig-livered color. He never would have thought that two mere guards would dare to treat him this way given his status. This felt even worse than being looked down on by those who had higher status than him, and he was instantly infuriated. "I tried to be polite, but you two refused. Didn't you hear who your elder is? Immediately piss off. If you continue being so blind, your elder will make you disappear from here with a single sentence. Scram!" Beside him, the other two men were furious, and they started to loudly curse at the fairies. If this was the real world, they would have immediately called for their people to beat them up. At this moment, a gentle and cold voice sounded out. "What's going on?" Just those three words alone were able to calm down the entire situation. As the voice sounded out, Yunming Xian slowly walked out, wearing a plain white dress, looking completely otherworldly. "Lady Yun." Seeing that Yunming Xian had personally come out, the two fairy guards stepped to one side and slightly bowed as they greeted her. Yun Zhengfan glared at the two fairies and coldly harumphing before smiling and rushing up to Yunming Xian with the other two men. "Ah, Meng Xian, so you really were here. Your second uncle, your third uncle, and I have come to see you. Meng Xian, you've become even prettier after not seeing you for months. You truly have the airs of the lady of the city. No less than expected from the daughter of the Yun family. As elders, we can't help but rejoice." Facing their big smiles, Yunming Xian was instead quite calm. "Welcome to Ling Tian City. I have many things to do, so if you have any business, please state it. If you don't, feel free to take a look around the city." Yun Zhengfan's expression did not change. Evidently, he was used to Yunming Xian's attitude towards him. He chuckled before replying, "Of course we have business with you." He then looked to both sides as he said, "There are too many people here. Let's talk inside." "No need, we can talk here," Yunming Xian replied expressionlessly. Yun Zhengfan's face stiffened, but he immediately regained his composure as he nodded and said, "Very well. It's actually the same thing that I talked to you about last time. Ling Tian City is becoming larger and larger, and managing this place must be getting harder and harder. As a girl, the burden on you is simply too great, so how could I, as your father, not worry about you? You're my daughter, and one of the successors of the Yun family. The Yun family has the responsibility to bear part of the burden for Ling Tian City." He stopped speaking, and Ling Chen, who had been silently watching, raised his eyebrows and gave coldly smiled. The Yun family's greed was evident. With Ling Tian City developing like this, anyone would feel envious. With Yunming Xian as the lady of Ling Tian City, How could they just sit by? Evidently, they wanted control over Ling Tian City as well. Beside Ling Chen, Xiaoqi angrily stamped her feet, and she said in a low and furious voice,
"So it's this again! Before, they treated her so poorly, but now that she's the lady of the city, they've started acting like this. Before, they continuously harassed big sister Meng Xian, forcing her to move. She even changed her phone number, and now they've come to find her in the city. They're simply too shameless."
Ling Chen. Yun Meng Xian had not returned to the Yun family this entire time. After becoming famous overnight, Ling Chen did not worry about her safety because Guiya was personally protecting her. Now that Yun Meng Xian had secretly moved to Xiaoqi's residence, with the Battle Alliance protecting her, she was completely safe.
That's right, that's right. You're the Yun family's daughter, so your city is naturally the Yun family's city. Our family should be doing everything we can to help you. Even though I, your second uncle, am not very familiar with the virtual world, your cousin Yunlan is quite familiar with it. Adding on our finances, we'll be able to make Ling Tian City even more prosperous. Ha ha, third uncle helping his niece is right and proper. That's right, I heard that the newly expanded region doesn't have anyone managing it yet. How about allowing third uncle to manage it? Don't you know your third uncle's abilities?
Hearing their words, rage was written all over the two fairies' faces, and they looked at Yun Meng Xian worriedly. Both of them could tell that these three men were Lady Yun's relatives, but their words and actions completely disgusted them. These sorts of people managing Ling Tian City was something that they could not accept. Yun Meng Xian listened to them until they finished speaking without any changes in her eyes. Evidently, she already knew why they had come. She calmly looked over at them as she said softly,
"I understand. I have many things to do, so forgive me for being unable to entertain you. If there's nothing else, please return. AI. Meng Xian."
Yun Zhengfan hurriedly walked up and said hurriedly,
"I know you're busy, but at least tell us whether it's a yes or a no so that we can make preparations."
Yun Meng Xian looked at him and said,
"I'll repeat myself again. Ling Tian City doesn't just belong to me. It has many owners, and I'm simply managing it. What you're asking for isn't something that I can decide by myself. But you're the lady of the city. If you can't decide, who can? We're doing this for you." Yun Zhengfan said.
"Thank you for your kindness, but I'm unable to make a decision on what you proposed."
Yun Meng Xian didn't bother explaining her words and turned to leave. Yun Zhengfan's face twisted, but he did not have the guts to fly into a fit of rage in front of Yun Meng Xian. He lightly breathed in and said sorrowfully,
"Meng Xian, make sure you think about this. I know I owe you too much, but in the end, I'm your father, and you're the Yun family's daughter. Putting all else aside, it was the Yun family that brought you up, and now that you've become so reputable, it should be time that you repaid the Yun family."
Yun Meng Xian remained silent. Xiaoqi was so angry that her face became completely red.
Despicable. They're too despicable. They know that big sister Meng Xian has a soft heart, and they're starting to attack her emotions. Why don't they think about how they treated big sister Meng Xian back then? They completely disregarded her wishes and happiness, and used her as a tool for the family. In the end, she wasn't even willing to return home, so they forbade anyone, including Yun Feng, from helping her. They're simply too shameless. Don't worry, Meng Xian will know what to do.
Ling Chen replied as he smiled.
AI.
Yun Zhengfan gave another long sigh as he continued to speak.
Meng Xian, I don't want to force you, but please think about what I, and your second uncle and third uncle, have said. There's also something else. Tomorrow is your grandpa's 70th birthday banquet, and you haven't come home in a long time. This time, as the Yun family's daughter, you absolutely must come back and stay for a while. After all, That's your home. I've even prepared your room for you.
All right, Yun Ming Xian replied as she returned to the administrative district's main tower. The three men looked at each other and shook their heads before leaving unhappily.
They've finally left. I'll go and comfort big sister Ming Xian. She must be feeling terrible right now.
After the Yun family's three men left, Xiaoqi quickly ran into the administrative district's main tower. Ling Chen stood there and frowned as he thought for a while. He picked up his communication device and said in a low voice,
Guaya, if nothing out of the ordinary happens, Yun Ming Xian will be attending her grandfather's 70th birthday banquet tomorrow. Keep her safe. It's best to bring a few people. 12 a.m. After logging off, Ling Chen immediately went to Qiyu's room, but found that she was not there. He walked to the courtyard and found that she was relaxingly lying next to the man-made lake on a deck chair, reading a fashion magazine with great interest. By now, it was early summer, and it was the best time for sunbathing. Qiyu's body was only covered by a thin muslin dress, her snow-white skin incredibly eye-catching. Although she was lying down, her snowy peaks stood tall and perky, and her curves were simply breathtaking. Her large, long legs were completely exposed under the sunlight, and her feet naturally dangled off of the deck chair. Undoubtedly, Ling Chen was not immune to all of Qiyu's enticement and seduction. Just staring at her for a few seconds caused his heart to chaotically beat, and hot blood to rush around his body.
Demonis!
Ling Chen inwardly muttered the word that he always thought of whenever he saw Qiyu, and he walked towards her. After bringing her to the real world, Qiyu refused to leave, and she lived the life of a rich young mistress. Everything was cooked for her or bought for her, and all she would do every day was sleep, watch soap operas, read magazines, go swimming, etc. As for doing housework, that was simply impossible.
Qiyu, there's something that you need to tell me today,
Ling Chen said sternly as he frowned. It was as if Qiyu had just discovered Ling Chen's presence. She slowly put down the magazine in her hands and slowly raised her arms, hugging her proud chest. By now, her skin had a healthy red glow to it after basking in the sun, making her look incredibly bewitching.
Little Master, why did you log off so early today? Did you miss me?
Seeing Ling Chen, a look of happiness appeared on Qiyu's face, and a pleasant fragrance sprang towards Ling Chen's nose. The enchanting fragrance almost caused Ling Chen to space out, and he suddenly bit his tongue. He continued to frown as he said,
Qiyu, you haven't forgotten why I've agreed to let you stay here, right? Oh, of course, it's because Little Master didn't want me to leave,
Qiyu said, as she smiled coquettishly. Ling Chen ignored her answer and continued speaking.
You said back then that you would tell me the truth about Shui Ruo's death if I allowed you to stay here for a month. Now, nearly 2 months have passed. If you still don't tell me about Shui Ruo, I'll take you back to the virtual world today.
This time, Ling Chen was incredibly resolute. From his expression, if Qiyu said anything that he didn't want to hear, he would immediately drag her back into the virtual world without hesitation. She started to slowly pout as if she was being wronged, her red lips looking so enticing that Ling Chen wanted to go up and kiss them. There was no man who could resist Qiyu's seductiveness. However, Ling Chen's expression did not change at all, looking just as serious. Qiyu gave in and sadly said,
All right. I didn't say it because I was afraid that Little Master would send me back to the virtual world right after I told him, so then I wouldn't be able to sleep in the same house as Little Master anymore.
Ling Chen.
But since Little Master is so adamant, I'll just tell Little Master. However, Little Master needs to remain calm,
Qiyu said as she raised her chest. Every time she blinked, it looked as if water would fall out of her crystal-like eyes.
I trust that you won't lie to me,
Ling Chen said calmly. His expression was calm, but his heart was trembling. Just what was this truth that Qiyu was talking about?
It was poison.
This time, Qiyu did not try to beat around the bush.
Poison?
Ling Chen felt quite shocked.
The thing that took her life was a fatal poison. However, it wasn't the Isrock disease, but something even worse than the Isrock disease. Something so bad to the point that the Isrock disease was completely neutralized by it and became dormant.
An earnest expression appeared on Qiyu's face as she slowly spoke. During this time, she had increased her understanding towards things on Earth, and she also knew what the Isrock disease was.
Poison? How is that possible?
Ling Chen felt quite confused. Shuirua had contracted the Isrock disease, but it was cured by the 13223 drug from Yunfeng. Shuirua's body had become much better to the point that she had been essentially completely healthy, so how could she have been poisoned? He had been with her the entire time and never left her side. How could she have been poisoned?
From what you told me about Lil Sis Shuirua's status, I used the internet to do some research, and I found a remarkable type of poison. What's interesting is that it wasn't thought to be a poison at the beginning but a miracle cure for the Isrock disease. However, not too long ago, it was discovered that it was a fatal poison even more terrifying than the Isrock disease. It was able to completely suppress the Isrock disease because of how much more powerful it was, forcing the Isrock disease to lock itself away. After it was discovered to actually be a fatal poison, it immediately became a forbidden good, and its name is 13223.
An explosion rang out within Ling Chen's head. Afterwards, he didn't hear anything that Qiyu said. 13223. The 13223 drug he had received from Yunfeng. The legendary drug that could suppress the Isrock disease. It was actually a poison, and it was actually what had taken away Shuirua's life. That night, there were not any injuries on Shuirua's body, much less any signs of being attacked. After he had regained his sanity, he had always wondered about that. It turned out that she had not died because of the Long family's attacks, but...
How could it be like this? How could it be like this?
Ling Chen muttered. The 13223 that had made him delirious with joy and brought Shuirua and him out from the abyss of despair was actually a poison? This was like an incredibly cruel prank. It had given Shuirua and him a bubble-like sense of happiness, after which the poison had taken Shuirua away forever.
If Little Master searches the name 13223 on the internet, you'll be able to look at its properties as well as the announcements calling for it to be forbidden. Otherwise, if it could really cure the Isrock disease without any side effects, it would have been mass-produced already.
Ling Chen thought about the last time he had went to the doctor with Shuirua and remembered the doctor's complicated expression when they had mentioned the 13,223 drug. Evidently, she already knew the truth about 13,223, but was unable to tell them because they had already used it.
I see.
Ling Chen's voice was filled with dryness and bitterness. The light of hope was actually the cause of Shuirua's death.
In that case, if we can't cure her of the poison even if she's brought back to life, then she'll immediately die again, right? This poison is incredibly powerful, and it will remain within a person's body for 10 years. Back then, I wasn't trying to scare Little Master,
Qiyu said confidently. Ling Chen sorrowfully sighed. Although his heart felt incredibly chaotic, his mind was quite clear. At this moment, he needed to maintain his clarity. He looked at Qiyu as he asked,
Then tell me, how can I cure the poison within Shuirua's body? Since you've said this, there must be a way. Little Master's quite smart. I indeed do have a way.
Qiyu's smile filled her face as she slightly adjusted her position, causing her large, snow-white chest to enticingly ripple.
Tell me immediately then.
Ling Chen took a step forwards as he demanded.
I can't do that right now.
Qiyu slowly shook her head as she charmingly smiled.
I've just said a lot, and I feel tired now. At least let me rest for a little while. However, I know that Little Master is in a rush to know, So I'll definitely tell Little Master today. The time will be 12 a.m. If Little Master can find me at that time, I'll tell Little Master everything. I won't forgive any tardiness, though.
After speaking, Chiyu smiled before lying back down on the deck chair and closing her eyes, continuing to enjoy the sun. Even though she had been sunbathing for the past half a month, her skin remained just as snowy white. Ling Chen did not continue to ask, because if Chiyu didn't want to say something, she would never speak no matter what he did. Even though he was in a hurry to know, he could wait until 12 a.m. While Ling Chen was talking to Chiyu, neither of them noticed a small white figure silently appear on the balcony on the second floor, listening to every word they said. When Ling Chen left, the white figure silently looked at Chiyu for a while before disappearing. After Ling Chen returned to his room, he looked up the 13223 drug and found that it was just as Chiyu had said. When he had given Shura the 13223 drug, there were very few bottles of it left. In fact, very few people even knew that it existed. After it was discovered to be a fatal poison, it was still not very well known, so it was only today that he had found out the truth about the 13,223 drug. Yunfeng definitely didn't know even now, and it was likely that Guya and the others still didn't know. Otherwise, they would have immediately told him. At the very least, the 13,223 drug gave Shuiru and him hope and allowed them to share a happy and blissful time together, though it was quite short.
Rua, that legend in the virtual world is definitely real. I believe it, and you need to believe it as well. You need to believe that I'll wake you up one day, and that day's coming soon.
After closing his eyes, Ling Chen muttered inwardly for a while. He repeated those words sometimes up to tens of times per day. After opening his eyes, he picked up the phone next to him.
Guya, if Meng Xian really does return to the Yun family tomorrow, remember to bring some people. Right now, she's extremely high profile, and there are definitely countless people eyeing her. If any of you are exposed, it'll be a risk to her safety. It's best to ask Qianmo and Yao Ying to stay by her side.
Ling Chen warned Guya about all of this because of Suer's premonition.
Yes,
Guya curtly replied before saying,
we've already met up with Winter of that year and 100 Miles of Ice. They want to come too. They're essentially the same as us, so let them join.
Ling Chen said without hesitating.
Very well. After joining, Winter of that year and 100 Miles of Ice's codenames will be Winter and Ice. Also, Yao Ying and Qianmo have looked over their physiological function, and the result says that their life force isn't withering but is instead becoming more vigorous. Their bodies are completely healthy, even healthier than normal humans. Their senses are completely fine too.
Winter of that year's yells could be heard on the other side.
Ah! Boss Ling Tian, we really weren't lying before. My smell and taste suddenly recovered, and Boss's touch and verbal abilities were suddenly restored as well. We really don't know why. We really weren't lying. As for our life force, that's even more confusing. Such a kind and handsome person like me would never lie.
Although Winter of that year was crying out that he had been wronged, Ling Chen could tell that he was delirious with joy. He had thought that he only had 1 or 2 years to live, and now he found out that his life force was incredibly vigorous and could most likely live until he was 100 years old. How could he not be delirious with joy? As for the matter with Winter of that year and 100 Miles of Ice, Ling Chen had always felt quite confused about them. His blood flowed through their veins, so there was a special connection between them. When he first met them, he could indeed tell that their life force was withering. However, after meeting them, their life forces became stronger and stronger, and their senses were restored, making him feel incredibly perplexed. Ling Chen ignored Winter of that year and asked in a low voice,
"How's Buggy doing? It's been so long. Why hasn't he been brought out yet?"
The Buggy Ling Chen was talking about was the Reaper who had been caught that night when he had charged into the Long family's residence. He was imprisoned beneath the Xianyuan family's residence.
His wounds have fully healed, and with his abilities, it'll be incredibly easy for him to escape. A few days ago, I snuck in and found Buggy. He said that Long Zhengyang would occasionally come to see him and seemed to have some sort of agenda. He wants to find out Long Zhengyang's agenda before leaving, and he also wants to find out some things about Master.
Oh? Ling Chen asked. Guya slightly hesitated but then added,
Buggy says that Master's mother seems to still be alive. He wants to stay in the Xianyuan family's prison and investigate a few things, such as who Master's mother is, and why Master was treated like that back then. Actually, Buggy told me not to tell Master about any of this before he got to the bottom of it.
Ling Chen's heart lightly trembled, and a person's figure appeared in his mind. He looked up and sighed.
I see. Tell Buggy to put his safety first. Also, tell him to use his time there to investigate the Long family's dragon's vein if possible. Yes.
Evening, 11:55 p.m. Tian and Shidisika were both asleep, while Xianyuan Dia Wu was still in the game. Normally, Ling Chen would be in the game as well during this time. However, today, he exited the game and silently walked out of his room towards Qiyu's room. Qiyu told him to find her at 12 a.m. Only then would she tell him how to get rid of the poison within Shuiru's body. As for why she chose this time, Ling Chen had no idea. However, since it was a time chosen by the Demoness, it definitely didn't bode well. Ling Chen put his hand on the doorknob and gently turned it, causing the door to open. However, there was no one inside. Ling Chen stared. She wasn't in her room? Could it be that the Demoness wanted to play hide-and-seek? Ling Chen glanced at the clock on the wall and saw that there was less than 5 minutes left until it was 12 a.m. If Qiyu really was hiding from him, he wasn't sure if he could find her within the remaining time. However, he understood Qiyu's character. She most likely wouldn't do such a thing. Ling Chen closed Qiyu's door with a bang, and just as he was about to call her name, he suddenly noticed that the light in the bathroom was on, and that there was the sound of flowing water from within. All of the others were either sleeping or within the game, while Chaoying and Chao Shi never used this bathroom. In that case, there one was only person who could be using it. Qiyu? Ling Chen's heart suddenly jumped. She had told him to come and find her at 12 a.m., yet she was in the shower. What was she intending to do? As Ling Chen walked closer to the bathroom, the sound of water became clearer. In fact, he could even hear the sound of hands lathering soap on skin. Standing in front of the bathroom door, a complicated look appeared on Ling Chen's face, and he knocked on the door while saying in a low voice,
Qiyu, immediately get out here!
Despite the sound of water from within, Ling Chen was certain that Qiyu could hear his voice. However, after he spoke, there was no response from within. The sound of splashing and flowing water continued and did not stop at all. It was as if Qiyu had not heard his voice or noticed that he was outside.
Fudge!
Ling Chen gritted his teeth and knocked on the door even harder.
Qiyu, I found you, so get out!
All that answered him was the rage-inducing sound of water. Just as he was about to call out to her for the third time, a soft voice came from within.
It's nearly 12 a.m., and the little master still hasn't found me. If I don't see little Mazer by 12 a.m., I will never to tell him the things about Lil Sis Shuirua. Poor Lil Sis Shuirua. Even if she's brought back by little master through his hard work, she'll have to die so quickly again. What a pitiful and sad fate. Looks like there's only 1 minute left. Will little master really not come? Could it be that little master has fallen in love with me to the point that he doesn't care about Lil Sis Shuirua anymore? Those words and that voice, apart from that Demoness Qiyu, who else could it be? Moreover, her muttering caused Ling Chen to gnash his teeth. Evidently she was baiting him in.
Without a doubt, if he really went in, he would fall into Chiyu's trap, and the consequences were evident. However, because this concerned Shuirua, he had to do it. All right, Demonis, you win this time. Ling Chen glanced at the time and did not hesitate anymore. He pulled the door open, and the instant he saw what was inside, he was completely dumbfounded. Steam filled the bathroom, and it contained a sweet fragrance, making one feel intoxicated. Water continued flowing, and a gentle light illuminated the woman in the shower. The soft light danced across her bottom, illuminating two flawless arcs, and in front of her chest, her proud breasts were like two gigantic, snowy mountains. Countless water droplets rained down from the peaks. Some directly fell down, while others slid across her shocking curves until they reached her feet. Because of the hot water, Chiyu's skin glowed red, and her lustrous black hair was spread out, not at all blocking her beautiful face. Facing Ling Chen, who had suddenly come in, she did not try to hide her body at all. Instead, she smiled, narrowing her watery, upturned eyes, and looked down, giving off an incredibly seductive air as if she was marveling at her own flawless body, while at the same time allowing Ling Chen to look all over it. Ling Chen was completely dumbfounded, and he couldn't move his gaze away no matter what. This was because Chiyu's body was not covered at all and completely revealed to him. At such a close distance, he could clearly see wherever he wanted to see. From the day he had met Chiyu, she had continuously used her body to seduce him. However, it was all in a flirtatious manner. Ling Chen was sure that she would quickly avoid him if he ever did leap on her. In other words, she was simply toying with him to mess with him, and with her scheming mind and background, how could she casually allow a human to have his way with her? And yet, although she was always wearing revealing clothing and making suggestive actions, she never revealed her most private parts to him. Ling Chen knew all of this. Before he had opened the door, he had expected to see a fully dressed Chiyu about to tease him. However, he never thought that he would really see Chiyu showering. Just how seductive was Chiyu? Ling Chen was certain that there was no woman in the world who could drive him crazier than her. Normally, he was afraid of even being too close to her, and even with his incredibly powerful mind, keeping himself in check was difficult. Now, he had seen her entire body whilst caught off guard, and in just a few moments, his soul flew out of his body and his eyes started burning. The water suddenly stopped, causing the bathroom to fall into silence. Chiyu seemed to only just discover him, and she raised her hand and tucked some hair behind her ear as she hazily smiled. "Little master, do you want to shower with me?" Ling Chen, who had been desperately suppressing his desires while reminding himself why he had come here, felt suffocated when he looked at Chiyu's chest, his mind buzzing. Chiyu's clear eyes were simply too enchanting, and they looked as if they were covered by a smoky mist. Those eyes and her incredibly sexy, naked body were enough to instantly destroy any man's self-control. Following this, Ling Chen's defenses crumbled. With a naked, peerlessly beautiful woman standing in front of him seducing him, he would doubt if he was still a man if he didn't leap on her. Just as his self-control crumbled, Ling Chen's eyes shot out a look of lust and greed, and he leapt on Chiyu like a ravenous wolf. He hugged her incredibly slim waist and ran his hands up her beautiful long legs. He pressed her down on the wet ground, causing her large breasts to shake. "Aw, little master, no, I'm still a... Chiyu's voice was incredibly soft, and her mesmerizing fragrance gently blew onto Ling Chen's face. Her beautiful eyes were tightly closed, and her face incredibly red. However, she did not resist, and allowed his body to press down against hers. "Ah!" Chiyu cried out, shaking her head and hair about, and subconsciously wrapped her arms tightly around the man who was pressing down on her. She endured the tearing pain, and her lips slightly parted, giving out moans that she could no longer hear. The seductiveness in her eyes slowly disappeared,
and was replaced by a blankness as a tear appeared at the corner of her eye. After a while, they finally settled down. The bathroom was in complete disarray, showing how intense their battle had been. After rampaging for half the night, the two people were still intertwined. Chi-Yu sat against the wall with a satisfied and happy look on her face, while Ling Chen was lying on her large chest, completely motionless as if he had fallen asleep. At this moment, an abnormal red light flashed on his chest, and a crescent moon the size of a fist appeared there. After appearing for an instant, it slowly disappeared. By now, Chi-Yu's eyes had become clear again. She looked at her position and Ling Chen sleeping, feeling complicated.
I'm sorry. To me, this is the best and most direct method. At the very least, it's my compensation to you. I'll use the thing most precious to me to compensate you.
Chi-Yu muttered as she looked at Ling Chen. She then closed her eyes as she softly asked,
"What's your name?"
"Ling
Chen."
Ling Chen did not move, but his mouth gave a sleepy reply.
"Where did you get that girl called Tian Tian from?" "Beijing. Outskirts. A meteor fell. Then we met Tian Tian. She said that she was from a place called the Xia Star." "I know. She wasn't lying, but just forgot many things,"
Ling Chen said.
"Xia Star. Demigod godhood. So it was."
Chi-Yu muttered to herself. However, she did not continue to ask, and it was as if she already knew the answer and was not very interested. She fell silent for a moment before softly asking,
"What sort of person am I in your eyes?" "You're a very beautiful, seductive, and dangerous person,"
Ling Chen dreamily replied.
"Then you must despise me, right?"
Chi-Yu asked self-mockingly.
"I don't despise you, although you feel quite dangerous. When I encounter danger, I can tell that you are truly worried for me. Even though I don't know your goal, you at the very least gave me hope for reawakening Rurua and even protected Rurua's body for me. You also told me many things that I didn't know. I'm filled with gratitude towards you, so I know that even though you've been using me for an unknown goal, I'm unable to stray from the path that you're leading me down, because I want to reawaken Rurua, and I also want to help you fulfill your wish."
Qiuyu's body gently trembled, and she looked up at the ceiling, feeling quite dazed.
"I would rather that you only feel wariness or even just contempt,"
Chi-Yu muttered. After a while, she raised a snow-white hand and pushed Ling Chen deeper into her chest.
"It's just that I'm unable to have any regrets, and perhaps I won't regret. Once Enchanting Moon has been sown, unless an ancient god power intervenes, even I will be unable to remove it. 3 months after Enchanting Moon is sown, I will be able to control your body and soul, and you will be unable to resist my commands. As for me, I will only be able to have you as my man. If I even touch another man's finger, I'll feel the pain of 10,000 arrows piercing through my heart. That day will come, and this is the only way to save you." Grievous knew it was now 3 a.m. The tightly shut bathroom door finally opened, and Ling Chen softly walked out. His steps were slightly shaky, and his arms were down by his side. His eyes were also closed, as if he was sleepwalking. He unconsciously walked towards his own room, closed the door, and began sleeping on his bed. Following this, Chi-Yu, who had put her clothes on, walked out of the bathroom towards her own room. At this moment, Shidisika, who was sleeping, silently opened her eyes. Within the darkness, her eyes twinkled like stars without a trace of sleepiness within them. She sat up and looked at Ling Chen, who had collapsed next to her, and stretched out her hand, placing it on his chest. Following this, a colorless light invisible to the eye was slowly released. Clang! A red-pink crescent moon mark slowly appeared. It was the enchanting moon that Chi-Yu had left on his body. A serious look that Ling Chen had never seen before appeared on Shidisika's tender, snow-white face. After maintaining that posture for a while, she brought her fingers together. In that instant, the mark on Ling Chen's chest suddenly jumped. It then strangely left Ling Chen's body, as if guided by a mysterious power, and then traveled to Shidisika's hand. Shidisika immediately tightly closed her hand, and as a colorless light shone out, the pink mark was turned into countless tiny pink motes of light and scattered in the air before disappearing.
Enchanting Moon's effects on Ling Chen have disappeared, but its effects on you will never disappear. That's your punishment for trying to scheme against him,
Shidisika muttered in a low voice. When the dots of pink in the air disappeared, she lowered her head and looked at the Ling Chen sleep. Her gaze became gentler, and she moved him into a more comfortable position. She smiled, kissed his forehead, and hugged his arm before closing her eyes and going to sleep. The next day, it was already 10 a.m. when Ling Chen woke up. Ling Chen sat up and suddenly felt a wave of powerlessness, causing him to almost fall back onto the bed. No way. Could it be that he messed around with that demoness too much last night? Ling Chen subconsciously rubbed his eyes, feeling incredibly depressed. This was simply illogical. He was Adam, who had walked out from heaven and hell. His body was essentially invincible, let alone a single woman. Even if he had 10 or 20 in a single night and did it 100 times, he still shouldn't feel this tired. Putting the tiredness aside, he even felt incredibly weak. Ling Chen quickly thought back to the events from the night before. That's right, he had gone mad on Chi-Yu's body for 2 to 3 hours, after which he had fallen asleep. What the hell? Could that woman really be a demoness? Could she have learned some technique that converts a man's yang energy into her own yin energy? Otherwise, how could this have happened? Back when he was only in his teens, he had done it with Faye for an entire day and night, but he did not feel this weak. Ling Chen jumped down from the bed, and the instant he landed, a wave of dizziness passed through his head, his vision flickering. These signs all told him that he had overspent himself to the point that his body had become incredibly weak.
Could it be because I haven't done intense exercise in a while? That shouldn't be it,
Ling Chen muttered to himself. Just as he was about to open the door was suddenly pushed open as a fragrant, violet figure rushed in. It was Chi-Yu with her beautiful, voluptuous body, as well as perfect S-line. She seemed to be in a rush, and she almost ran into Ling Chen's chest.
Little master.
Seeing Ling Chen, Chi-Yu bewitchingly smiled as her voice became incredibly gentle.
Did you sleep well last night?
After waking up, the first person Ling Chen saw was Chi-Yu. She still looked incredibly beautiful, but she seemed to have more charm about her. Being so close to her stunning face, busted chest, slim waist, and long legs, Ling Chen's blood started to boil, and his body's temperature started to rise. Chi-Yu's seductiveness was simply unrivaled, and after tasting her, even Ling Chen found it difficult to control himself around her. Luckily, something even more important came to his attention.
Last night, you didn't tell me how to get rid of Rurua's poison.
After saying this, Ling Chen's face became slightly red. He clearly remembered that he had leapt at Chi-Yu and gone at it madly, and then he felt that he was very tired, and after closing his eyes, he had fallen asleep. It wasn't that Chi-Yu hadn't said it, but that he hadn't asked. Moreover, he had fallen asleep in front of this demoness. This was simply too shameful, too embarrassing. Hopefully, she didn't think that he was actually a lightweight. Seeing him ask so bitterly, Chi-Yu giggled, pursed her red lips, and said,
I wanted to tell Little Master last night, but Little Master only wanted to bully me and didn't give me an opportunity to say it. All right, I'll tell Little Master. In actuality, Little Master doesn't need to worry about the poison in Lil Sis Shueru's body. Because she's been placed by Little Master into the fairy fountain, she's long since been completely purified by the fairy fountain's water. Right, breakfast is on the table. Cute little Sha has heated it up for Little Master many times, so remember to eat it. After saying this, Chi-Yu gave him a flirtatious look before walking out.
leaving Ling Chen standing there, motionless as a statue. He had been worried for an entire day, yet the answer he received was that the poison within Shuiru's body was long gone. He wasn't sure if he should be happy or depressed. Happy because after he brought Shuiru back, she would be fine. Depressed because he had been completely toyed with by that demoness. However, last night he had really done that demoness. It actually happened. In actuality, Ling Chen never thought that it would actually happen. The fact that she was a character from a game was not important. However, he was certain that Chi Yu had always been plotting against him and using him. In more direct terms, although Chi Yu always called him Little Master, she was always just using him. Since he was a tool, how could she allow him to do it with her? And yet, that had actually happened last night. What's more, she was the one who had initiated. What made it even more difficult for Ling Chen to stay calm was that she was actually a virgin. Ling Chen felt a bit hazy. If she was just using him, why would she do that? Yesterday, she was still a virgin, which meant that even though she was incredibly seductive, she definitely wasn't an easy woman. Ling Chen simply couldn't understand, but the way he felt about Chi Yu completely changed. Although she had been using him this entire time, she had willingly given herself to him last night, allowing him to be her first man. As such, no matter what her goal was, she didn't want to harm him. At the very least, most of his worries were unnecessary. After thinking about that, Ling Chen silently let out a breath. When relaxed, a man's nature would naturally be revealed. Thinking back to Chi Yu's naked body, a lascivious light shone in Ling Chen's eyes. Before, he could only endure it and suppress it, but now, that demoness was his woman. What did he need to endure for any more? Yesterday was definitely an anomaly. After he was full after eating, he would show that demoness his strength at night. After thinking about that, Ling Chen's eyes became much clearer, and he marched right to the dining table. Around dusk, Ling Chen received news from Guiya. Just as he had expected, she had left for the Yun family in the afternoon to be at her grandfather's 70th birthday banquet. She, who had been used as a tool for the Yun family, would cause a massive disturbance by going back. You have to protect her safety. Especially so, because Long Tian Yun has been silent for too long. This isn't consistent with his personality. He's definitely looking for an opportunity to take revenge, so you have to be very, very careful, Ling Chen said. Yao Ying and Qian Mo will be right by her side, while Gui Shou, Lung Feng, and Ling Mei will infiltrate the Yun family and protect them from the shadows. So please rest assured, Master. Oh, Suer also came. She most likely knew that Yunming Xian would go, so she went with her father. Suer? Ling Chen thought for a moment before saying, all in all, just be careful and don't let down your guard. Yunming Xian will most likely spend the night at the Yun family's residence, so tell Yao Ying and Qian Mo to stay in the room with her. After hanging up, Ling Chen frowned. With Yao Ying and Qian Mo by her side, as well as Guiya protecting her, it was essentially impossible for anything to happen to Yunming Xian. However, there was still an ominous feeling within his heart. Is it because I'm thinking too much about Suer's words? Ling Chen muttered before shaking his head. Yunming Xian's grandfather's birthday banquet went quite late, and everything had gone quite smoothly. After seeing off the guests, who were not staying, it was about 10 p.m. Yunming Xian would naturally stay overnight. After all, this was her home. Suer did not go back, and she instead went to find Yunming Xian, and the two sisters slept together in Yunming Xian's room. At night, everything was peaceful in the Yun family. Yunming Xian and Suer talked on the bed for a long time before sleeping. Guiya and the others did not sleep at all the entire night, remaining incredibly tense. Soon, a whole night passed, and nothing had happened. In the morning, Su Hongcheng personally came to take Suer home, and Yun Ming Xian refused the Yun family's request to stay behind and left the Yun family. Although she was born into the Yun family, it was not a place where she wanted to stay. After all, in that family, profits were more important than feelings, and she didn't want to become one of them.
Was I really just thinking too much?
After Su'er went home, Yun Ming Xian returned to the Shao family's residence. From the previous day to today, nothing out of the ordinary had happened. After receiving a report from Guiya, Ling Chen was able to finally relax. Su Hang was too far from Beijing, and Meng Xian's status was too special. Since she wasn't willing to return to the Yun family, what about coming here? She would at least be completely safe here. As Ling Chen was thinking, his phone started ringing. Ling Chen looked at the screen and saw that it was Guiya, who he had just gotten off the phone with.
What is it? Master? We don't know why, but Yun Ming Xian suddenly fainted,
Guiya said in a cold voice.
She fainted? Why?
Ling Chen's eyebrows jumped.
We don't know. Yao Ying and Qian Mo are currently checking up on her, but it shouldn't be anything serious. Perhaps it's because she's been working too hard lately.
Guiya's voice was suddenly cut out by a woman's scream, and Ling Chen heard Qian Mo's shocked voice.
Eyes rock disease.
Bang. Ling Chen's body swayed, and his phone fell heavily to the ground.